pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning, Moines County Board of Supervisors, December 14th, 2021. Are there any changes to the tentative agenda?
I have none.
We have an agenda. Meet with department heads, and elected officials. Kevin Glendenny, Moines County Sheriff.
Good morning. Our jail population, we're at 62 adults, 2 juveniles out of county, and then 2 adults out of county. So we're holding pretty strong there. We're happy with those numbers and glad to see that they're where they're at. We had a 911 board meeting last week. Actually, Shane and I both attended. We're on that board, and the 911 board, this will kind of relate to our agenda item. The 911 board agreed to cover DESCOM's portion of that, the future Motorola record management system and CAD system. So we're happy to see that. So that portion will be covered by the 911 funding. We got 2 graduating from the academy this Thursday, or actually this Friday. So we're excited to have them back. We'll start their training and get them going and get them ready. That's about all I have.
Tell them they have big shoes to fill.
They do. Lots of years of experience we see leaving at the end of the year, so.
Kevin, them 2 juveniles, when you say that they're out of county, are they up at Central Iowa or are they down at the detention?
They're both in the detention center in Lee County.
Down at Lee County.
That comes out of a different budget.
It does. Doesn't come out of our lines. But it gets paid for nonetheless.
Yeah, it gets paid for nonetheless.
At $160 a day for each one of them.
Yeah, they're a little bit more cash.
Zach James or Jared Lassiter, land use. You guys can decide.
Not a whole lot, need a report, like usual, got a couple subdivisions kind of in the works. Floodplain things, I'll just kind of take some general phone calls, and then we've got our work session, one work session today of, that we'll have over the next couple weeks, so.
And you had a board meeting this week.
What's that?
You had a meeting this week, board meeting.
For the planning commission?
Yeah.
Oh, on Thursday, yeah. Jim was there. Had a good agenda. One other thing, I guess, as a side note too, the RFQ for the public health facility has been sent out, email to the list, and then I think it's posted on the county's website now. We'll be getting a notice to the newspaper, and so this process has started.
Thanks, Zach.
Yep.
Shane, can you hear all right now from both sides of the room? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ken Heinman, Community Services.
Good morning. We had our CO meeting last week on Wednesday, and we had legislators come to talk about the loss of Fund 10 and our request to reinstate Fund 10, well, July 1st, when we're supposed to be losing it, so we'll see what happens there.
I've been told that there is a meeting up there on that sometime this week, I believe.
Good.
What that word, at least you're aware of it.
Yeah, that's right, we made our request. We had, during the meeting, Transition Link took responsibility of the Jefferson and Van Buren County jail diversion programs. We had 2 jail diversion programs. One was run by Optimay and one was run by Region Transition Link, it's called. And the person that was doing the Optimay jail diversion put in their resignation, and so it was a time when it was being reevaluated, and now we're gonna have all 8 counties under one jail diversion program. So I think that'll be good. I guess that's about all I have right now that I can think of. We did our normal business too at the meeting. I got a call from a bank manager that I have to go meet with after this meeting, talk about, he has a homeless person floating around their bank lobby, and just, he wanted some information, so I'll give him some information on how to help that person, and both homeless shelters and mental health services. I can give him information, and he said he would love to help the person if he can, so, and they can always direct him our way too, so.
One question, did you get all that candy ate?
I took that to the CO meeting and it got eaten completely. I did not take the box home with me, so that was good.
Well, Ryan told me I could have some, and I said, I better not, because there's plenty of you in here to eat it, so.
It did get eaten, so that's good. I can't have any of it myself personally, so I was glad it was gone.
Thanks, Ken. Chris Lee, Conservation.
Good morning, just kind of prepping for our work session tomorrow evening.
5:30, right?
Yeah, and that'll be up at our shops up at Big Hall.
What are you serving for lunch?
What'd you like?
That's a loaded question.
There you go.
If you don't get blown away.
Right, yeah, exactly. Keep the sales down on the vehicle.
Thanks, Chris. Brian Carter, Secondary Roads.
Good morning. Mild weather so far, so the guys are still moving along. We're still ditching. Just started another little ditching job. We're just doing small stuff right now. Honestly, there's probably a couple spots we've gotten to that really would have never fit into our priorities if you didn't get this kind of little stretch at the end of a season. So, so yeah, they're making good headway. We're doing our last round. We're doing another round of spot rocks. So if you hear about a load of rock here or there or something like that, each blade guy's getting a truck for one day, just to hit any spots where they've noticed it's thin or whatever. Other than that, we're working on paperwork. You spend the winter basically buttoning up and tidying up from everything that happened paperwork-wise through the summer. So the office is plenty busy, and we're working on a couple of projects for next year. Starting to buy some right-of-way towards a couple projects for next year. So working towards maybe a couple bid dates. I'll communicate with you guys more on that as we get a little more headway. And other than that, like I said, nice weather. People are keeping busy. We do have our annual county engineers conference here this week, so we'll be a little thin out at the office. There's 4 of us that go up to that, and I'll be a little bit behind because we have a meeting there Wednesday morning here at the courthouse. But Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we'll all be up in training sessions up in Des Moines. So anyway, moving along.
Thanks, Brian.
Yep.
Janelle Nellie Longquist, Des Moines County Treasurer.
Good morning. We're just keeping busy, and I don't have anything new to report.
My wife had a good experience yesterday. She went
Good,
she wanted
good.
a
Glad to hear
license
that.
plate. She was a little disappointed she couldn't get behind the desk and pick out the number she wanted. But she said it was probably all just as well. So.
Well,
So-
that happens often.
So I understand. Thanks, Janelle. Terry Johnson, Des Moines County Auditor.
Good morning. I guess I'll just follow up with what Zach said, and yep, I got that RFQ posted on the county website for the Health Department building. I got Rodney's RFP posted on the website for the courthouse front steps, and currently working on an RFP, which hopefully I get a little more input on that for the DHS offices that we need to relocate. And then also working on my ordinance for re-precincting and redistricting, because the city's supposed to have their second meeting next Monday, and then I'll have to jump right into getting advertised so that we can do our ordinance the first 2 Tuesdays in January, so that I can get that sent to the Secretary of State's office, so.
Thanks. Go ahead.
It's just, yeah, we're like maybe 2 or 3 months behind because of the pandemic and
Yeah.
the census and all that, so it's kind of a rush type thing, so.
Thanks, Terry. Rodney Buisner, Maintenance.
Good morning, just keeping busy. We do have the front step project out for bid, so if anybody's interested in that, I'm gonna thank Terry for putting that on the website, so anybody can go to the website under the bid opportunities and see that, or also go to www.klingerplanroom.com and get that information. We do have a pre-bid conference meeting this Thursday at 10 a.m. for those interested in that project. Other than that, just keeping busy. Thank you.
Thanks, Rodney. Are there any department heads online? I'm going to assume there's not, but if there is, you want to chime in at any time, feel free. Correspondence.
Have done.
I did. Got an email. Dear Board, I request that the Des Moines County Board of Supervisors immediately consider voting to approve Des Moines County as a Second Amendment sanctuary county. With over 25 Iowa counties already established as Second Amendment sanctuary counties, I strongly support and encourage the Board to immediately vote for this important measure. Sincerely, Marlon Dubitz, Lieutenant Colonel, retired U.S. Army from 13280 151st West Burlington, Iowa. And then somebody mentioned to me in passing over the weekend that there's a petition out there that they're going to be presenting the board with, so I assume that'll be somewhat in the near future. Okay, more correspondence. We will proceed to discussion and vote. We have payroll reimbursement claims in the amount of $870.57 and non-cash taxable claims in the amount of $26.31.
Move to approve.
Second.
Sarah?
Jim Carrey,
Yes.
Shane McCampbell,
Yes.
Tom Broker.
Yes. We have a resolution appointing someone to the Southeast Iowa Regional Planning Commission Board of Directors. And surprise, surprise, it's the very gentleman, Shane, that you were expounding on his virtues last week in this position.
Yes.
Whereas the Des Moines County Board of Supervisors has recommended Jim Carrey to serve on the Southeast Iowa Regional Planning Commission's Board of Directors, and whereas the Southeast Iowa Regional Planning Commission's Board of Directors has reviewed the Des Moines County membership status and is in good standing, be it resolved that Jim Carrey is hereby appointed to a one-year term to the Southeast Iowa Regional Planning Commission Board of Directors, which term will expire on January 1st, 2023.
I move to approve. I couldn't get better.
Thanks, Shane.
I'll second that. Sarah?
Shane McCampbell,
Aye.
Tom Broker,
Yes.
Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
Do you approve yourself?
That sounds exciting to me.
As I recall, you had lunch. That's lunch. I would have thought that would have been more enthusiastic than that. I don't know what the menu looks like.
Some sandwiches, cookies,
Oh.
chips.
Cookies.
Yep.
All homemade by Zach.
They tried Jared's, but his didn't turn out good.
That's the hesitancy.
It is pretty good lunch when you go out there, you know it?
Not fancy,
It's good.
but maybe I'll start baking cookies.
You might look at that last page. That might be for your signature, the representative. But okay, we have a resolution setting the date for the fiscal 22 budget amendment hearing. Be it resolved, the Board of Supervisors hereby fixes the time and place for a public hearing on the fiscal 22 budget amendment for Tuesday, January 4th, 2022 at 9 a.m. in the boardroom at the Des Moines County Courthouse. The Des Moines County.
Move to approve.
Oh, I got 2 paragraphs left, Shane.
Calm it down.
The Des Moines County Budget Director is hereby directed to publish this. The notice and estimated summary is required by law. This resolution shall take effect immediately. Now you're on.
Move to approve.
Second.
Sarah?
Shane McCampbell,
Aye.
Jim Carrey,
Aye.
Tom Broker.
Yes.
Oh, that's for 10 pencils.
Oh, okay.
We got,
I think the directors nominate them, the Burlington directors nominate the public sector, isn't that you, Burlington and West Burlington?
so, that's who this for, it's Tim Pencil, so.
Okay, the three of you decide on that, I think, is that right, Jack?
Yes, there's a representative from Burlington, West Burlington, and then the county, and so the three together would make that appointment. And Tim has been who that person is, I don't know what,
So that-
see, that's,
So we can go
he's
ahead
still
and-
Does
recommended.
this board recommend
No,
that, or is that?
No, those
Third
three
page.
Just
together.
those three people, they
Yeah.
recommend that?
Yeah, that
Okay.
third page is what Jim takes with him to the commission meeting.
Okay. Okay, we have a resolution appointing did we get both contracts back?
We got the one signed by Dr. Huber. I have not gotten one back from Dr. Wooster yet, so if you wanna pull that one.
Okay, well,
Contract.
we'll do the
Resolution.
resolution, but not the contract, so that will amend I guess, the agenda a little bit. And on D will be approval of resolution appointing the county medical examiner, and hold off on the contract. We just got it out Friday and might not have had a chance to get
Yes,
it back.
and Dr. Huber, she signed hers and she sent me a picture of it and I got it attached.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we're, the county medical examiners resigning at the end of the year. So we have a new county medical examiner and the deputy medical examiner. Anyway, whereas a county medical examiner shall be appointed by the Des Moines County Board of Supervisors for a 2-year term pursuant to Iowa Code Section 331.8011, and whereas Dr. Megan Wooster has agreed to serve as county medical examiner for Des Moines County pursuant to an approved contract agreement between the Des Moines County and Dr. Wooster for county medical examiner services. And therefore be it resolved that effective January 1st, 2022, Dr. Wooster is and shall be appointed to serve and act as medical examiner for Des Moines County, and shall have all powers, rights, and duties in such position, including appointment of deputy medical examiners, in accordance with Code of Iowa, Chapter 331, and otherwise as provided by law. Be it further resolved that Dr. Wooster shall serve until June 30th, 2023, which shall automatically remove for another 2-year-like term without further resolution, unless or until this appointment is terminated in writing. And contract, we'll run that through next week when you receive that, her contract on that.
We'll go ahead and approve this.
So we can approve the resolution to appoint Dr. Wooster as the medical examiner.
So moved.
Second.
Sarah?
Jim Carrey,
Yes.
Shane McCampbell,
Here.
Tom Broker.
Yes.
This will be the third medical examiner we've had since I've been on the board.
No, she's quite interesting. She's busy. She's already been up to the state to take, I believe it's a coroner's class, so. Okay, and we have a deputy medical examiner. And we do have a copy of her signed contract, so we can approve both the resolution and the contract. Unless somebody wants to hear me read that resolution again, changing medical examiner to deputy medical examiner, we'll waive the reading of the actual resolution. But I would accept a motion to approve the appointment and the
So moved.
contract.
Second?
Sarah?
Shane McCampbell,
Yes.
Jim Carrey,
Yes.
Tom Broker.
Yes. We have approval of cost for a countywide RMS CAD, that's a record management system, a computer-aided dispatch system that we've had, I believe, 2 work sessions regarding that, and going to take, what do we pay for out of lost revenue portions of the ARP. So you want to explain what that is and what the final costs are?
Sure, I'll do my best to give kind of a brief on what the system is. We've discussed it in a couple work sessions, but it's a record management system and computer-aided dispatching. And what that is it's the system that essentially, as dispatch receives a 911 call and they dispatch it, or a non-emergency call, as they dispatch it, this is the system that maps, it gives addressing, it gives details and information that they input into the system, and tells all of our emergency medical services, our firefighters, our law enforcement, where to go, how to get there, and gives them the details, gives them background on the residences, the possible people that might reside there. It holds all that information. On the record management side, law enforcement and our jail will use this to keep track of inmates, of law enforcement records. Any reports that we generate, it'll be kept in this record management. All of our evidence, all of our video will be documented through this. And this is going to be a system that countywide will be moving to, with DESCOM, our dispatch center, being on the same system. All of the law enforcement agencies in Des Moines County being on the same system so they can communicate. We all have the same information available. It's really a big step for us where we wanted to see this go, and it's a step into modern technology with having information available to law enforcement that we need. It's a huge help in solving crime and officer safety. It'll give the information that we all need when we're trying to get to the place that we're going, and have that ahead of time. So when you see a law enforcement officer on their mobile data terminal, a fancy word for a computer in their squad car, all the information they're getting on that is through the CAD and record management system. So that's given them mapping information and suspect information and dispatch information. We also have that in all of our cars and our jails, all law enforcement, and that'll also be used by emergency medical services and firefighters. So it's a system that will all be using countywide, and I think we're all excited to move that direction. I hit on earlier that the 911 board approved the CAD portion. So our 911 board, as you know, is they essentially work off of revenue from our cell phone lines, that surcharge that we see on cell phones and landlines, and they approved to fund the CAD portion, that $150,000 portion for the computer-aided dispatching. And then the remainder of that portion, the record management system, we've split up based on officer counts between us, Burlington PD, and West Burlington PD. What that leaves us with is a $289,000 cost, just shy of $290,000 cost. That includes data conversion, and data conversion is important because all the data that we've kept up to this point in our jail and our record system and our CAD is going to be converted over, so they have to bring in some very smart people that can convert that information over into the new system. So we would be looking at $289,441 cost for the upfront cost of the program. And then we would have the program, and then we'd have an annual maintenance cost moving forward annually of $25,450. So that would start in years 2 through 10, would be an annual maintenance cost for that. We're splitting those costs with Burlington Police Department. We have equal shares because of our jail, our number of our correctional officers and the number of our deputies are exact with Burlington. And West Burlington's picking up a portion, and then DESCOM's picking up a portion for their annual maintenance of that as well. So that's what we're requesting through the ARP funds, and hopefully to be able to move forward with that technology in Des Moines County.
I assume that if the deputy comes to my house, before they get out of the car, they will have had some sort of a risk profile of Mrs. Brooker.
Yeah, it's,
The risk of confronting her.
I'm not sure that she would make the list. I would not want to go on record as saying that. But if there was a concern, then we would know about it.
Does she listen to these meetings?
I hope she doesn't listen to this one.
She probably has a friend that says you got brought up at the meeting.
Move to approve the
KG,
Yes, sir.
I just want you to know for the record, I think it's a cop-out that you're spending tax dollars per CAD to tell you where to go. I've had every citizen been telling me where to go for years, and it's for free.
Shane, seeing as you voted for that in the 911 meeting, I don't know where you're coming from on that.
Let's get it on. I second it.
Sarah?
Jim Carrey,
yes.
Shane McCampbell,
Aye.
Tom Broker.
Yes.
Thank you very much. We're excited to move forward with this. I think it's been, we've had some roadblocks with our record management and CAD system in Des Moines County, and we're really excited to be moving forward with this, so thank you.
We're looking forward to it too, Kevin. Thank you. Okay, and we have a real estate purchase agreement that will, yeah, we stand. As you know, the county has been searching for a property to locate the new public health building, and we've successfully secured the property. We have a offer to buy real estate acceptance where the old Washington School was located. I believe the address is 1910 Agency Street. It's on the corner of Agency and Curran. It's I thought it was the best location for it in the county. It's centrally located. It's right close to the freeway. There's two fairly major streets in the corner, but yet it's a quiet neighborhood. There's it's not far from shopping, but it's a quiet neighborhood. The lot's big enough so that you can not only put the facility there, there's room for a parking area. I know over the years, public health put on various clinics, drive-through clinics, and they'd have to use a retail parking lot somewhere to get set up. They could use the parking lot there, as the county engineer pointed out to me, it's got natural drainage to it, so we're excited. Anyway, and so, and this will be a ARP expenditure of $250,001. So, as long as the board approves this offer to buy real estate. So, they took sealed bids a month ago.
Yeah, a month ago.
When did we have that?
24th of,
Earlier in November, we had a closed session for real estate, so and that was a couple weeks before they took that. So anyway, it's acceptance of an offer to buy the real estate at 1910 Agency Street in Burlington, Iowa for $250,001.
Move to approve.
Second.
Sarah?
Jim Carrey,
Yes.
Shane McCampbell,
I don't think he heard you.
Shane McCampbell,
Yes.
Tom Broker.
Yes. So,
Good deal.
I know that
You know, the bus service goes by there and everything, so.
oh, it's
got
I was, I think that's the most ideal spot in Des Moines County. And I guess I didn't mention it with we purchased it from, the Crossroads Community Church of Burlington, Iowa. We have an appointment to the Des Moines County, I guess it's a reappointment, to the Des Moines County Conservation Board. Gentlemen, my appointed term as a member of the Des Moines County Conservation Board expires on 31 December 2021. I would like to continue to serve on the board. Please consider me for an additional term. I for one, certainly not want to say no to Mr. General Garden. But I suspect that the Conservation Board use a little pressure.
I think all of them, and staff included, were very concerned that he
Arm
wasn't
twisting.
going to opt to re-up. And he left us in suspense. We normally ask in November whether the departing board member wants to re-up, and he made us wait another month. And even at the very end of our last meeting, he said that he would re-up again. So he's definitely been a great leader and certainly a mentor to me. So I'd be thrilled to have him back on the board for another 5 years.
Okay.
Definitely was a lot of sigh of relief when he said he was gonna run again.
For sure, yes.
Okay, all we need is
Move to approve.
Second.
Sarah.
Jim Carrey,
Yes.
Shane McCampbell,
Yes.
Tom Broker.
Yes. Okay, and we have an appointment to the Des Moines County Veterans Affairs Committee. Gentlemen, this letter is my request to continue as a commissioner of the subject commission. I have held the position of commissioner since being appointed by the board in July 2015. The mission role of Veterans Affairs has been and continues to be of concern to me. By this letter, I, as the Board of Supervisors, continue to trust and honor me by allowing me to serve the veteran community of Des Moines County. Thank you in advance for this volunteer opportunity. Sincerely, Marilyn Box.
Move to approve.
Second.
Sarah.
Yeah.
Shane McCampbell,
Aye.
Jim Carrey,
Yes.
Tom Broker.
Yes. I started to say, I believe anything I've heard about Marilyn, that she's doing a fine job.
Yes, she is.
Okay, we have personnel actions. Brooke Marlin, the VA Administrator and General Assistance Coordinator, a 2.5% step increase from $35,651.55 to $36,542.84, effective January 4th.
Move to approve.
Second.
Sarah.
Jim Carrey,
Yes.
Shane McCampbell,
Yes.
Tom Broker.
Yes. And we have a personnel action for the auditor's office. Chandra Bleesner, a clerk 1, a 42-month step increase. The previous rate was $37,609.17. The new rate is $38,361.41.
Move to approve.
Second.
Sarah?
Jim Carrey,
Yes.
Shane McCampbell,
Yes.
Tom Broker.
Yes. Okay. And we have reports. We have the clerk of courts report for fees collected in November 21. Veterans Affairs monthly report for November of 2021. General Assistance monthly report in November of 2021. And the jail statistics for November of 2021. These reports will be on file in the auditor's office and available for public review. We have minutes for the regular meeting of December 7th, 2021.
Move to approve.
Sarah?
Shane McCampbell,
Yes.
Jim Carrey,
Yes.
Tom Broker.
Yes. Any other business?
None.
I have none. Future agenda items. Committee reports.
Had a Russ meeting Wednesday. That's how I found out Ken had that big box of candy he took. But, everything's going pretty good there. They got the new pump truck up and operating, and it's got people calling in wanting to pump where, so it's been a good thing for them. And, when I brought that up about the guy digging the sewer up and blocking it off, you know, after then digging it back up and opening it up, why, they've got that all taken care of, and they're paying their bill now. But it took somebody like Kevin Glendenning, but he didn't do it, but one of his partners in crime did, you know, so. So they got that pretty much settled, which is a good deal. Which is costing everybody else up there.
Kevin was busy saving Christmas.
Then we had a regional planning meeting. I attended on Zoom, so I missed out on that good sandwich, I'll tell you that, but, the most exciting thing about that was finding a place to put the C buses over Mount Pleasant, so. But outside of that, everything else, Zach got it all in shape, so things are going good.
Good. I didn't make it to the SEAL meeting, I had a conflict, but anyway, I attended that public information meeting for that Navigator Heartland Greenway carbon capture pipeline that was in the Iowa Utility Board. They had it was an interesting presentation. The county engineer was there. He understood some of it that went over my head, so which isn't too much of a lift. But there were, and as I mentioned to him earlier, I think most of the long-winded complaints were, I don't think were from Des Moines County. They were activists that followed those meetings around. But there were a number of people from Des Moines County asking questions about where they thought it was gonna go and how they were gonna be reimbursed or treated, so it was interesting. I didn't think it was any overheated or anything.
Not at all.
Yeah, it was fairly low key.
If you guys meeting, if the homeowner doesn't, if the Iowa Utility Board approves of all that, you know, through stating that, and if a landowner don't want it to go through his line, the way I read that, they can
Eminent
go
domain.
eminent domain on that. And
Iowa code gives them the right for eminent domain if the board approves that.
yeah,
Yes,
that's the way I read all that.
you are correct.
There's a website, I think, if you want to write, you have any objections or comments you want to make on that.
There's an entire document, trove of documents online. I'd have to find the website again. I have it bookmarked, I think, in my office, and anything at all that comes into the utility board that involves that, whether it be, there's complaint letters on there, there's the letters that they sent initially to the board, all that stuff, and it's massive. I'm not sure how easy it'd be to find something, needle in a haystack type thing, but if there was somebody that wanted to express they encouraged them to express that and send it to them. It was actually ran by a utility board member, the meeting was. Yeah, so.
Where does it cross the river? I assume it does.
It does.
It comes up, because it goes to the ethanol plant is where that line goes, right?
Well, that's the spur, but the crossing of the river will be down,
Were you talking about the Mississippi River?
I assume that's what you're talking about.
How many rivers you gotta cross?
I don't think they probably cross the Skunk, they probably follow it down, so.
But there would be a number of rivers across
I mean,
Iowa.
across Iowa. I assume you're talking Mississippi, and it'll be down in southeast Lee County. The map is not, there probably is a map now for Lee County after the meeting, but the map is not extremely detailed.
I was just curious.
But they have a corridor.
I suppose it could go over the dam in Keokuk or something?
No, it's going under.
They drill,
going
what
under.
they say, maybe 50 feet or 100 feet,
Yeah.
whatever it was, they'll figure out, then they directional bore, or somehow or another, they drill a hole underneath the Mississippi.
Yep. It'll go underneath. They talked about that actually. And somebody asked a question, I'll go underneath the river, and then, I didn't know a whole lot about it honestly, so eventually it goes down to a spot in Illinois. There's basically 2 geological formations in the United States that can accommodate this product for storage underground. One was down there in Illinois, the other is up in Dakota, right, Tom?
I don't remember, but I
That was the other, because that's where the competitor pipeline is going. And then they go to this site and it gets pumped, I don't even have the right dimensions, but it gets pumped down into basically a shale layer that is pressed in between 2 layers that are impermeable. And they pump it into there, and eventually it actually turns into a solid, if I understood right.
after a long time, it
100
eventually turns
years
into
or-
some sort of a rock-like
Yeah,
substance.
it's geologically and chemically, it's well over my head. I wouldn't claim to understand all of it, but that's the basics of it. Yeah, they will go under the river.
That's all I had. Public input.
Well, hey, I got a,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I did have 2 meetings, obviously the 911 KG already covered that. And then for Mississippi Valley Workforce Board, we've got a business vacancy position open. They need preferably a female. We've got 60 days to fill that position. So if somebody knows of somebody that would be interested, it would be appreciated. That's all I got.
What was that for? They needed somebody?
Mississippi Valley Workforce.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Shane.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Public input. Anyone from the public would like to address the board, you may email the Board of Supervisors at board@dmcounty.com, that's BOARD@dmcounty.com. You may call 319-753-8203, extension 4. That's 319-753-8203, extension 4. We'll give you a couple minutes to initiate that email or that call. In the meantime, does anybody in attendance have any comments or questions? I didn't know, did you come in after I didn't see you there when I was walking?
I did.
Person,
Lisa
so-
was upstairs,
Yeah.
and then I was in go to the mental health hearing. So, you know, it's busy. Bare knuckles litigation. I'm on the way out. Lisa's trial for today got continued, and she was not talking to people for a while, which happens sometimes. For all of us, right, in litigation. So she's like, hey, you got it in the gap. But, yeah, so she was scheduled for trial today, and that got bumped. But, again, we're down to the wire, so every one of these trial dates, they're, I mean, this one was, one emerged, but they're double, triple, and in some cases downstairs, last week, we had one where we had 12 of them stacked, which means not only does the attorneys have to prep up 12 different trials, but we have to get subpoenas out to all the deputies, all the officers, all the lay witnesses. It's just a ton of work for everybody involved, but it's moving.
This is because of the, when they shut the courts down for COVID and backed up those cases and said, well, we'll extend your speedy trial to December 31st of 2021, or
Yeah.
different, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, good luck.
I mean, we're getting, some of them are cleared. I mean, some of the dockets are cleared, some of them aren't. I mean, it's just, everybody's working 20 miles an hour to get through that, so.
What happens to the person that's on trial if you don't get that speedy trial by?
Unfortunately, our county, as well as most of the counties in the state, are gonna have criminals that just
Walk
walk because we're not, we may not be able to get to all of them, so. I mean, that's the reality of it, so they're trying to, at this point, triage and say, okay, who is it that really needs to get it, to make sure we're not having the wrong people walk, so, yeah.
You think the state could do something about that?
Well, I thought the last kind of big COVID scare, I honestly thought the Supreme Court, seeing what was happening, would continue that day out, and they didn't. And we're talking what was that last one? Not this Omicron, but Delta, and the Delta was a big deal. I thought they would, and they didn't. And from hearing the chief at Bench to Bar, I don't think the Supreme Court plans to. But I mean, at this point, like, hey, we gotta get through them, or we're not. So.
Kevin, sounds like you got some work ahead.
Yeah, it's, there's been some fallout from it. It's, there's been some difficulties already, but
Yeah.
we'll get through it.
Good luck, Trent.
Thanks, Trent.
Tell Lisa good luck.
Yeah, I mean, she's doing good. I mean, they're definitely getting through it, but there's just a lot. Yep.
Okay, well, no other comments, seeing the phone doesn't ring with an aye, we're adjourned.
All right.
Aye, we're adjourned. We've got a work session following the meeting with Jared and Zach regarding the subdivision ordinance. Take a 5-minute break. We'll be back.
Nope.
And Zach James of Southeast Iowa Regional Planning to,
Oh, nice.
the
I heard every mouth, I wouldn't hear any talk.
Hello.
Is this the homeless guy from the bank? Ken send him down here?
We found a spot for
That was
it.
uncalled for. Uncalled for.
It's a way to resolve a problem.
uh,
He does qualify to be a board member. That was a good one, Brian. That was good.
That was good.
That was good.
Thanks, Batman.
My wife's been reading that on Facebook about this
What's that?
person's bank downtown, sleeping on the bench.
which bank?
Oh, they moved down to I've seen them a block up, they must have
I saw somebody
been
down
working
at
their
the
way
center the other day.
down the hill, yeah.
They were out in our parking lot on Monday,
Okay.
or last
They
Friday,
have
last
shelter
Friday.
here in town somewhere, right?
Yeah,
They just don't wanna go there, or?
yeah, they've been kicked out several of them.
It could be full, I don't know.
When I was, gosh, this is talking way back, but when I was a freshman in college, or sophomore maybe, I was on the paper, and one of the stories we did was on the homeless folks in Des Moines,
I'm turning this
and
off,
how
and I'll start.
there was a bunch of them that lived literally down by the river, you can't make that up, but in the old flood zone, right, so it had all been purchased, bought out and all that. And there's this whole kind of camping area, almost commune of homeless people who didn't wanna stay sober
Yeah.
and abide by the rules of the shelters. And they were fine there in the fall and the summer, but in the winter and the spring, you know, so in the winter, they'd have all the problems with the cold, and then in the spring, it would flood out, and then they would start coming into downtown Burlington, or downtown Des Moines, and what to do, and, you know, it was an issue. But most of them, you would go and talk to them, they wanted to be there,
Well,
you know?
I know down in Lee County, and I've talked to some of the people down there, that, you know, the county owns housing down there,
Yeah,
and it's not full,
yeah,
because people don't like rules.
yeah,
They'd be fine to live here if there's no rules.
Sure.
And they can do whatever it is they're doing now.
yeah.
I don't know.
He's signing.
He's signing stuff, I think, for the meeting, but I don't know.
Shane, were you gonna try to make it in here?
What's that now?
Were you gonna try to make it in here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's fine.
If you guys wanna go ahead and get.
No, no,
started.
no, 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 we knew you'd been feeling better, we didn't know whether you were gonna make it down or not.
Well, I thought I was gonna make the meeting this morning, but man, I was moving slow, getting out of that shower, and I didn't think you guys would want me to come.
What's new?
It's not a very pleasant smell, boys. I don't like it.
So have they finally given you a date yet?
Thursday.
copy of the review summary there.
We have a work session with the board and Jared Lassiter and Zach James about Southeast Iowa Regional Planning regarding subdivision and some proposed changes to it.
All right.
So you gentlemen have the floor.
Yeah, I gave a little background last time, maybe I'll recap that a little bit, maybe in a little less detail, but it's kind of crazy to think that it's been about a 2-year effort here, started in November 2019, to make some updates to the zoning and subdivision ordinances for a variety of reasons. We got some things that are just outdated, some confusing wording and confusing language, some formatting that just doesn't make a lot of sense. Some things maybe not very customer friendly. And then we've just seen some documentation over the years from the zoning commission as well, just of things that they'd like to see as updates in both ordinances. And so it was time for an overhaul, and we spent a lot of time working on those, mostly Jared. But we've had multiple meetings with the zoning commission to review these, at least 3 times. We met with Trent on a couple different occasions to discuss some of the matters or review the ordinances. And then some of the staff too, had conversations with Brian or other people, conversations with neighboring counties, staff, things like that. So just a lot of time and effort has gone into this, and it all kind of culminated with a recommendation from the zoning commission at the end of October to approve the revised ordinances under some set of conditions and a few things that they kind of recommended modifying for those, and we can talk about some of that. So this work session today, and then the next couple ones are just opportunity to go through some of these things that were updated. I think our idea is to just go through some of the bigger changes and highlight some of those things. If you had a chance to look at any of it or have other questions or comments, we can talk about those as well. But I think our goal is to just go through some of the bigger items and talk about those things. So
I looked at on your list there, there's questions that it gave me, but when I went through them, looked them up in the ordinance, some of them were self-explanatory
Sure.
after I saw it.
Sure. So, unless you guys have specific questions on anything, I thought it was just to go through some of the larger changes that we highlighted here and just kind of talk through those, and then if you have questions.
The last time we did this, Brian had a question. Was it the zoning ordinance or was that the subdivision ordinance?
We started going through subdivision ordinance last time.
Okay.
So.
I've gone page by page. I don't remember, do you remember what page we got to, Zach?
Notebook. I think I've got my notes in here still. Nope, I don't have.
I think we were at 7 or 8.
It's on my desk.
Okay.
So getting into the
We
plan.
just kind of got through some of the definitions, I believe. Is that where you want to pick up, is going through some of your stuff, Brian? Or you wanna-
No, I don't, I do whatever you guys wanted to do. I have stuff page by page, so, I'll just,
Yeah,
I
we'll
can
just
get
go through our notes here, and then if you guys have questions.
If you have if we touch on something you have a specific comment on, we can go from there.
I really didn't use your summary, honestly, because I went page by page. So since I did that, I did go through your summary.
Sure. I'm just saying as we go through this, if it relates to
Yeah.
something you got a question on.
Fire away, and then I'll probably go through my stuff too.
So, yeah, if you want to just start going through the bullets.
One basic change that's kind of just codifying the procedure we've already done previously, somewhat informally, but just making sure that there's consistent terminology and cleaning up the way that it's formatted. Because originally with our subdivision ordinance, there was just one set of rules that applied to every subdivision, and it was getting to the point where we had all these smaller subdivisions, 1 or 2 lots, no new infrastructure, just exchanging between family members or just selling one lot for somebody to build a house. It was so commonplace that the involvement of the zoning commission and all of this extensive review was just very time consuming. So in the early 2000s, there was an amendment to create a separate category called minor subdivisions, which is specific to those smaller scale subdivisions that didn't have a whole lot of changes involved with what just selling 1 or 2 lots. So that, the structure of that allowed for the zoning commission to not have to review those minor subdivisions in exchange for having a sign-off process where we have individual county departments sign off and approval after reviewing it, and then it would just come straight to the board. And since then, the vast majority of subdivisions we process go through that minor subdivision process instead of the larger one with the zoning commission. One issue there is that it was formatted in such a way that the topic of minor subdivisions didn't even come up until the chapter on final plat. And so it was kind of just plunked in there to the point where it wasn't necessarily clear that all this other stuff beforehand didn't necessarily apply for those subdivisions, particularly since preliminary plats don't even apply to them at all, since it goes straight to final, it's already been surveyed. And then there was this third category, which was kind of a midway compromise, where we had a few instances in the past where there was property that was subdivided right along a road, where it was a number of lots were involved, but there was no new road or utility infrastructure because they were just plunking those houses down along the road. And so it was determined that it made sense to at least have it go through zoning commission review, but to allow to skip the preliminary plat and go straight to final, given that there's no new infrastructure involved, and there's not really that need for that overall review of the design before it gets surveyed. And so that has been done several times before, but it was never officially referenced in the ordinance. So that's where we created this standard subdivision category, which is the midway between a minor and then what we're now calling major, which major was essentially the process that where you have a preliminary and a final plat and essentially applied to all subdivisions when the ordinance was first created. So now it's been streamlined so that those sections on preliminary and final plat detail what is specific to each one of those categories and what process it goes through. That's largely just a structural change to the ordinance, but it's somewhat significant enough that I don't think it deserved at least a general
It clarifies a lot of
yeah.
things from the previous ordinance,
Right.
because the minor subdivision, like you said, it was, I don't even, if you didn't know about it, it's kind of tucked away and not very clear about what it was asking for, so. This really just makes things streamlined, it makes it a lot easier to understand and clear what the process is, so.
Well, what do I have to do with that? I don't have a problem with that.
Right, what page are you on?
8 of the ordinance. Well, this is something that's kind of woven throughout, but actually they're described on page 7, so where it describes what the individual categories are.
Okay, thank you.
Preliminary plat.
So added some language about road and utility improvements. This was through the zoning commission discussion. There was some concern about, well, what happens where you have a major subdivision where they have to put a new road in, and do they think they can just go ahead and build the road and then come back with the plat later and we're all good to go? Because there's the way the chapters are structured, going from preliminary to final, it wasn't necessarily clear that there's supposed to be oversight of that infrastructure, that it can be inspected when it goes in, to ensure that it complies with the county's requirements. So there was some language put in the preliminary plat section that makes it clear that, well, it's not necessarily required for that infrastructure, for those roadway and utility plans to be submitted before the final plat is, that if they are planning to actually put the infrastructure in before, then we need to see that beforehand. So they could always bring it in later too, but they'd have to wait to actually put it in until we've had a chance to review that. So that just makes that clear. And another change in that section on preliminary plat is that to deal with situations where we've got, and this happened recently with Henry Boland's multi-phase subdivision and Washington Road,
And there's been a number of others like that where they have a preliminary plat, which has like a dozen or so lots, but then they do it in phases to take it to final. So we added because previously the requirement was preliminary plat, you got 2 years to take it to a final. So this changes that, or amends that to clarify that when it's done in multiple phases, it's just 2-year increments added on to, so when the first, if they do it in phases, then the first one needs to be within 2 years of the preliminary, and then phase 2 more years after that. So I think that's one where we used that process previously, but it makes sense to just have it in the ordinance. So that's the structure of how that's supposed to go. And then one other change specific to the platting that's pretty significant is that it previously had a requirement that the final plat needs to be acted on within 30 days of submittal, which I know there have been instances where complications have come up in reviewing it where it was not able to be completed during that time. And we confirmed that state code actually specifically says 60 days. And so we thought, well, what's the point of having it half that time if that's not what the state requires? And so we just changed it so that it references state code and 60 days instead of 30. So that just adds some flexibility there, and we're not constantly waiving that because you periodically have issues come up where it's not able to be completed in exactly 30 days. So that's it. That's all I had for anything related to the actual platting process and the approval of plats. There's a fairly long chapter dealing with the design standards, so we can start going into that. First of all, we added a reference to the zoning ordinance because previously it wasn't clear in instances where you've got a uniform setback requirement applying to subdivisions, whereas in zoning ordinance, there's different setbacks and different requirements for each district, some that are stricter than others. And I think that's just a reflection of the fact that the subdivision ordinance came first. And so with the other ordinance coming later, it was sort of an afterthought that, oh, if there's some cases we might need to let them know that if they're in the 2-mile area around Burlington, that depending on where they're at, they might have issues with building if they don't comply with that, with the zoning ordinance. So this is just a way to make it clear from the outset without us having to inform them every time that, hey, you might want to check the zoning ordinance too and see if that's the lots as you've platted them are going to be an issue going forward with the zoning, with what somebody wants to actually build.
Is there a page number on that?
That is on page 16. Specifically under number B2, where it says requirements of other county ordinances. And so it says in some instances, the one county zoning ordinance requires larger minimum lot sizes depending on the district. So that's, I think I said setback, I was referring to the minimum lot sizes there. So that just a better, there are a number of instances like that where we now tie into other ordinances where applicable, just so we get in the habit of having it there in the ordinance rather than always having to remember to remind people that, oh, this other ordinance might apply as well. So the next one on width of lots and easements.
So,
okay,
can
right.
I ask a quick question there?
Go ahead.
The ordinance you're talking about is the 2-mile, the ordinance that governs the 2-mile.
Right.
I didn't know you were on page 16, so I was listening, but I'm not sure I was with you completely. I have no issue with the cross-reference. What I have an issue with is if you're trying to apply an ordinance that applies in 2 miles to somebody like me that lives in Yarmouth, who doesn't have to comply with that ordinance. So I want to know, you spoke a lot. It may not be the case, let me be clear of that, but I I'm just asking, are you, it says, for instance, it says something about ordinance number 34 requires larger than minimum lot sizes. And you said, well, we'd like this policy to reference the ordinance that we have or whatever. Are you just talking within the 2 mile that would apply?
Well, right, 'cause the jurisdiction is defined in that ordinance as applying to only the 2 mile.
Yeah, but you're referencing it in the subdivision ordinance, and the subdivision ordinance covers the whole county, so that's why I'm
That's
asking.
what it says in some instances, so it's just gonna
So
apply
in some
when the
instances-
zoning ordinance
So in
applies.
some instances, it's only in 2 miles.
Should there be a reference to the 2 mile ordinance?
I don't have a problem with it, I'm just, because I wasn't reading immediately where you were at, I wanted to make sure that I didn't miss it. Because I do have a problem with me living somewhere else, with me calling and saying, hey, I wanna do a subdivision. Well, this references this, so even though you're not in the 2 mile, we're gonna make you do something different.
Well, that's definitely not the intent. If you're,
That's
if you,
fine, that's
if
fine,
you think the
that's-
wording is potentially could be misinterpreted, but
No,
that's definitely not the
Would
intent.
it be clearer if it did reference the 2 mile zone?
That's up to you guys. I just simply wanted to, I finally figured out where you were at and what you were.
It says in some instances, Des Moines County
Yeah.
zoning ordinance number 34 would require this
And so-
minimum lot size, but in that ordinance, it specifically defines the 2 mile
And
boundary.
there's no shall
So,
statement
I
here
get-
either. It's just,
I'm
it's
fine
not
with it.
introducing its own regulation. It's just saying, hey, here's another ordinance that might apply.
And I'm good with that. I just, in some instances, it's generic, and I wanted to ask the question.
Okay.
And it's referencing all, it's saying all, or isn't there somewhere in it where it's referencing all ordinances?
This is where it's at.
Other Des Moines County ordinance, requirements of other county ordinances. Other Des Moines County ordinance subject to enforcement by land use administration, place restriction on development. This ordinance, accordingly, these requirements should be considered when a subdivision is being designed. As zoning and floodplain development permits will not be issued for newly subdivided lots that do not comply with the requirements of the respective ordinance. In some instances, Des Moines County zoning ordinance number 34 requires larger.
I guess my thing, would it make it any clearer, let's say.
I mean, we
I've
could
got a
possibly
ordinance
put it in there.
That, you know, in the 2 mile ordinance or something, so just to eliminate somebody having to go look up another ordinance, they can say, okay, that's what it means, if that's what the intent is.
Yeah, I mean, we could add it in there.
That's fine, yeah.
I don't
You guys-
think it hurts anything. I just don't know that it was necessary, but I mean, it would
Well,
just
I
add
don't-
that little bit of context
I
though,
don't
that makes it a
know
little clearer, so
that
that's fine, we can add
necessary,
it.
but just a little bit of context for somebody who's looking at it, it's clear to them immediately.
I think that puts us in a sticky wicket where,
You know what?
a sticky wicket, where if we do it, we
Put that in a sticky
can, we
wicket.
can simply do that for, Des Moines County zoning, right, and say, well, that's within 2 miles of Burlington and now as amended, West Burlington.
No.
No?
No.
Is it just gonna be Burlington still?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll strike that then. Within 2 miles of Burlington. However, the problem we run into is we're also referencing the Des Moines County floodplain management and those requirements. So that we can't just simply state with a singular clause, because that zoning map is, or that floodplain map is all over.
Mhm.
So I think what they're saying is, we could say, in some instances, or when, we could say, you know, when other ordinances apply, but I don't think we wanna, if we start putting in the exact definition of when one does, then we have to put the exact definition of when another does. You see what I'm saying?
I have,
And that starts to become cumbersome.
as long as your guys are good with the language, I'm fine. I just want you to tell me that you're not trying to apply something that applies in the 2 mile to the rest of the county. That's really,
Right, you're not trying to.
Oh, we can,
Yes.
we couldn't.
I get what you're saying, and I don't read it as such, but we
then
can.
the
look into
attorney,
some-
the attorney doesn't read it that way, then I'm not gonna argue with that.
Neither am I. If that's good, I just,
Yeah, I don't see how we could do that, cause that ordinance defines where it applies, so.
I thought if you could clarify it, but then if it doesn't clarify it, then that's,
You don't wanna make it a
that's not a
mess.
good addition.
Alright,
Page 16, are you done with that for a second, Jared?
Yeah,
Okay, then go to the top of page 16, because this has come up in multiple conversations over my time with Board of Supervisors. I mentioned it to Tom. I know this is not something you're focusing on as far as a change, but there's been conversation after conversation, and the entire time I've been here about agricultural restrictions in private ground. Tom, the top of page 16 is what I mentioned to you, that I don't know that this board has any interest in doing anything. I'm just pointing out that that's the couple paragraphs in the subdivision ordinance that puts some restrictions on what people can use their agricultural property for when it comes to subdivision.
and that's something we didn't,
And I should note, I'm sorry, I don't think I have this in the list of the major changes, but for that section, specifically section B1, agricultural, that first sentence is the same as it always was, that's not being changed. But the A and B, at least initially, we had proposed adding A and B to allow a little bit more flexibility on that, because previously it applied to any time you're dealing with prime ag land, which is 20 acres or more of land with a CSR of 70, I believe. So this would have changed that so that it would not apply in instances when all of the lots under 5 acres for residential are to be occupied by a proprietor of a neighboring farm, close family relation, or an unrelated individual employed on the premises of the farm. So that's largely gonna be minor subdivisions, but that's geared to situations where, hey, people involved in agriculture, family members are gonna wanna build homes near each other, so that should be a clear exception there. And then also, B essentially refers to those minor or standard subdivisions, where they're all gonna have frontage, all the lots are gonna have frontage on a public road and won't require any new roadways or utilities to access them. So essentially you'd have a big, like, say it's a 40-acre CSR property, and they divide off a series of small lots along the road for residential, and that would be allowed under this, as long as it doesn't involve new roads extending further back into the property. So that's what we were initially proposing, is to make it more flexible than it previously was, in allowing situations where that would be appropriate, that would not, this wouldn't be an obstacle there, but it would still apply in other instances if it was like a larger, major subdivision where you extends all the way back into the interior of a property and you're just doing it to sell, as for a typical residential subdivision, to sell land. So that, we touched on that last time. This is one where we aren't, if
it
the
was
board.
already there,
Yep.
and we're trying to make it more flexible.
So if the board feels that that's something that we wanna consider changing course on, we're open to that discussion.
And we would have to go through that a little for me to be completely familiar with exactly what you're saying. My initial discomfort with where you started was a CSR rating.
Uh-huh.
I'm not big on telling people what they can and can't do with their land. I have a cornfield here. I want to build a house in it, or I wanted to sell it to Trent so he can build a house in it, or whatever, he's going to do with it. I don't think that we have any business telling somebody, nope, that's too good a cornfield, you can't use it for anything other than a cornfield.
We let them
Who
take it
establishes
for-
the rating?
That's going to the NRCS or FSA office or whatever, those are all established through soil maps that they have with certain soil characteristics.
And I should also note that even as it is currently in the ordinance, it allows that, it specifically prohibits, when it says residential development, it's referring to residential development on lots of less than 5 acres. So it's not an outright prohibition of construction of homes. I think that was designed as a way that, hey, if you're doing 5 acres, conceivably there could still be some farm ground on that, and it's not changing the character of the area. Even though conceivably you could just take the remainder of that 5 acres out of crop production and then just have it be open space, which I,
And did we in fact bump that number up? Because at one point, wasn't it like CSR 70 or something that was really pretty low?
no,
Or 80?
we still have it at 70. We didn't propose changing that, but that's the way, I mean, I don't know if it had been different in the past, but that's the way
70
it
is
is
not
now.
real special land.
Yeah, I
I mean,
remember in my comments.
if you're getting it into
I
CSR
tried to
stuff.
bump it up to 90. Just because at some point, you're talking CSR 70, that's almost every piece of farmland.
A lot of
I
it,
mean, if it's tillable, it's CSR 70, right?
not far off of it.
So,
I'm essentially uncomfortable with
Freestone.
CSR.
Freetown.
With telling somebody, you've got this kind of land, you can't use it for anything else.
What's the exact definition in there?
Prime agricultural land, a contiguous area of cropland within an individual lot of record that is a minimum of 20 acres in size and has an average corn suitability rating of 70 or greater. And I believe actually this has been altered slightly because previously it basically said a parcel, which was kind of.
Where's that at?
It's in
Definitions.
No, okay, on what page?
5.
I think this
That's
has,
what stopped Bessler out there at the end of the blacktop, Danville Road there.
yep.
I was gonna say, this
CSR
is,
rating 70, he wanted to build out there, couldn't do it.
Yeah.
we're not, well, I'll say this again, we're not married to this is just clarifying or
No,
trying to make it
no,
more
no.
flexible, but I was just gonna highlight, this probably has only come up a handful of times, if that,
And-
where you had to
I
try to
apologize.
enforce something
I'm
on
on
this,
page
but
5 and I can't
not that
find
that
it.
matters.
I bring it up because it's come up many times in the past, just as far as conversation. And while they're going through
No,
a
it has come
process,
up
they
in
might as well
conversation,
discuss
yeah.
it. That's the
And
reason.
and
I'm
I
fine
brought it
with
up,
that.
I brought it up in work
You brought it up last
meetings
time, yeah.
before, over the years. But I'm on page 5 and I'm looking at all these sewer systems and subdividers, I cannot
Page
find.
4, prime agricultural land, or at least that's
Okay.
the
Page
copy
4?
that I have.
Okay, maybe,
Gotta put the word prime in front of it.
Mine's on, mine's on page 5.
Wait a minute. I think I have a different version of it here.
there you go.
You
Okay,
can,
you've got a different page.
When it comes to
Okay.
CSR, you can get a hold of the GIS office, they can draw basically a picture, a rectangle, and it'll calculate the CSR or
Can I see
whatever.
that for a second? I'm just wondering why those
That's,
numbers are
those,
different.
you printed that out for me, or Sarah did. Is that,
That's the copy I have, my page numbering is off by 1.
Oh,
Is yours
this is-
4?
This is a different version,
I
'cause
mean,
the one I have has
basically,
draft
if-
on
If you're
it.
talking ag land,
Where
there
it has a
is
watermark.
Is this the old
because the
one?
bank's
Oh,
gonna
this
require.
one.
it for
Yeah, this could be a little out of
So,
date.
It's not
There's
something.
probably
that
not
people are like,
drastically
I don't know what
different.
CSR is, we'll have to, spend extra money to find that out. Most farmers are already know their CSR because they're using it for insurance purposes, they're using it for banking purposes. It's just a common
Yeah,
part of the valuation of the land.
well, that's how they tax the assessor. If you look at it, you've got a 40-acre field, well, Brian can look at this better than I can. It says you've got 10 acres, such and such with the CSR, doesn't it break it agricultural land down like that, Brian?
GIS side.
Well,
I think on
it
the
is kind of
assessor,
the ranking
yeah.
mechanism for
Assessor.
quality of land.
Yeah, it's on the GIS site.
And they break it down by non-cropland, cropland in terms of assessment. And so that's why previously the definition didn't specify, and so it was like, well, like a whole parcel. Well, what about the portion of the parcel that's timber or there's a house? So,
Well, I guess this reminds me kind of like when I first interned with Senator Lumby years ago. There was this, Supreme Court had changed an opinion on a family law thing that a bunch of legislatures were mad about. So they said, no, it can't be that way. Those SOBs, when they came up with the law and they got it through both funnels, both camerals, right away, and they were gonna change it back. And we were getting calls left and right from various advocacy groups not wanting it changed. And so the boss comes in and she's like, okay, what are the calls and what have we received? And I'm like, well, we're getting all these calls about these people that want to stop this bill. And she's like, okay. what, you know, well, who's for it? And I'm like, well, nobody. And she's like, well, go and double check the website, see who is for it. You know, there's places where different lobbyists and different organizations can be for, you know, pro or con various legislation. And I looked, and I'm like, well, nobody's for it.
What's the legislation to,
So, and she was like, well, then why is anybody why are we trying to do this? What's the point? If nobody's for it, people don't want it, why are we fighting for it? And I think when we're talking about this prime agricultural restriction, I think that's what we fall into. Who's for a prime agricultural restriction?
not me?
People that like control and zoning.
Well, people, yeah, that like to tell somebody
It's
else what to do
definitely-
with their property.
So
It's definitely
if nobody's
directed
advocating
from-
for it, then why leave it in there?
I think historically, for us, it's been a priority just from the agricultural sector, because there's been a lot of concern about loss of
Urban sprawl.
productive land, and particularly for purposes such as this, where it's low-density residential and in a rural area. So if the argument could be made also that, well, if it's not your land that it's regulating, then who's to say you should allow somebody else to do what they want with it? So those are the two arguments there.
I mean, the reality of this is 2021, it's not 1980,
Yeah.
when we're worried about somebody coming in and building a big mansion for farmland. They're worried about people coming in from New York with a group that's putting their stock prices in, or putting land in a bunch of, what do they call that? We had those folks here last week or 2 weeks ago. But where they're putting their money in and they're buying all the land, and they're just using it there. I mean, but so they're still fighting people buying land just to buy it and rent it out. So it's a different animal in 2021, to say that somebody can't sell their land to somebody that wants to subdivide it.
I think
And
the
Go ahead.
intent behind a lot of that was so somebody wouldn't take their 20 or 40 acres of good prime land and try to put a multi-unit subdivision on there with a bunch of houses out in the middle of the county.
And I think it kind of stems from this mentality of viewing the farmland of the county as this communal good, where we're not looking at it in terms of individual owners of land here and there. It's just saying that we don't want to reduce the overall acreage of good productive farmland in the county, and so it's seen as a public interest to protect that from development. So agree with that or not, I think that's really what we're coming from here. And so is that means of thinking about the ag land of a county no longer applicable? Is it not appropriate to consider it from that perspective? Is it more important to value the private property owner's rights and however they want to use the land?
We
I
can't.
think it's more about the property owner's rights personally. I don't know why we have to protect the ag land, or what's the big deal.
Better get ready for that.
But I hate to
big
tell
deal.
anybody, I have to agree with Tom on that. I don't like telling anybody what they can do on their own property. People buy properties out in the country so that they can do whatever the heck they want to do, pretty much, and don't have to have people all up on them. So to regulate them, I would think it would take a special situation, or to add regulations on them. I think it would take a special situation.
Go back to your original thought, change that 70 to 90 and you got your problem solved.
I think we do. I think when you're talking CSR 90, I mean, that's high-grade land.
Yeah.
I mean, when we're talking
I was gonna ask you, can
70,
you break down those, he said 70
Doesn't
was
change the
any
principle.
ground.
Huh?
What's
It doesn't change the principle.
At all.
Doesn't seem like.
It doesn't change the principle,
No,
depending on what your
okay,
principle
but
is.
it's gonna-
Don't tell people what to do with their land.
Yeah.
I don't think it has to be decided today, because you're not passing this tomorrow. I just wanted to bring it up because I've heard the discussion many a time.
Well, maybe
I will,
they
I
still
will.
haven't decided because
now-
we're gonna
now-
come
now-
back for approval at some point.
Now's the
I
time you
understand
want
that.
to address this.
But I'm just pointing out, now, one thing I'll mention, it doesn't seem to take a whole lot anymore for a utility company to come in and buy options on 1,000 acres, no matter how good the ground is, and talk about slapping a solar farm in and ruining that ground for possibly ever. I
And
mean,
bringing a pipeline across
So-
all that good prime
Oh, my
ground.
goodness.
so I mean, there's other stuff out there, and I'm not a fan of the utility, I'm not a fan of the solar thing, but that gets into some personal stuff, so, there are other things out there other than just people building. Generally, farmers are not looking to split their ground up because they're in it.
Yeah.
They're in it because they want to produce and they want to try to make that money, but
But back to the 90, doesn't that take care of our problem though?
No,
Well,
we're still telling people what they can
you
do or
still
can't
can't-
do with
yeah,
their
you-
property. It's
it's right.
just a smaller
raising
amount of
the-
property.
Small until a few
I
people.
mean, we have 90 CSR.
Well, what did they-
It's less, but there's 90.
I mean, honestly, we could even just take it out. I don't even think we've had to enforce. I don't know if we've ever had to enforce this in the 4 years we've been dealing with it.
My thought is
so.
if you're going all the way up to 90, you're getting to the point where realistically, how often is somebody actually gonna be willing to
Right,
divide
well,
land like
we're
that?
getting
Because
to a market point. Yeah,
if
I
it's
mean,
that,
that's
if
kind of
the land
the
is
point.
that high quality, then conceivably they could, but it's probably gonna be so rare that what is it really even beneficial to even have it in there at that point? Because the incentive to keep it as farmland is much higher.
Do we need it in there?
Or some concern, we don't.
Comes down to a choice. It's just it's a position that the
Jimmy?
board takes.
What's that?
Where you at? How do you feel?
I don't like telling people they can't do with their own property. That'd be like me getting ready to sell my car to you, and somebody saying, you can't sell it to him, you gotta sell it to somebody else. It'd be the same damn difference.
Or selling it to me.
Huh?
Tom's already got 2 cars, you can't sell him.
No, or selling it to me and saying, Shana, you can only drive this. It's your car, I'm selling it to you, but you can only drive it on Friday and Saturday.
Yeah.
So that's 3 of us that say take it out.
And it doesn't
Okay.
sound like it's getting applied very often. So
Yeah.
it
you
sounds
have
to
to
me
have-
like you get rid of it.
You have to have a property that's at least 20 acres of farm ground, first of all, and then the CSR has to be 70, and then you have to be dividing it into pieces smaller than 5 acres. I mean, you gotta already meet.
Well,
a bunch
I
of
mean, I will tell
stipulations
you
that
that
almost never.
there is a
have
ton of
applied.
ground in this county that those factors apply to. It's just those folks are using the ground rather than right
Right.
now looking at a subdivision. But every year that goes by, the big farmers get bigger when auctions come up. It's no different than some companies. It's just a factor of it. So there actually is, in my neck of the woods up there, a lot of ground that applies to all of those categories together. So.
Yeah, that part of the county is.
Yeah, up in that area, it probably would.
Yeah.
So.
But like I said, we're not. It was
All
already
right.
But
there.
it's also the same part of the county where you're getting interest from the alternative energy people, because it's large acreage, so that's.
It is. Anyway, I like private property rights, but this isn't my decision. So,
Why don't you just vote 3-0, pull it?
Alright. Well, what do you think about zoning commission for that?
We'll have to discuss that and see.
Yeah.
If there's major change, that's something we'll have to check on, is if we need to go back through with zoning commissioner, or not. That's something we can figure out.
Right on.
Because ultimately,
Discuss it.
you're welcome to go against any of the recommendations of the zoning commission anyway, since it's just a recommendation, so we'll have to decide if that's something worth further discussion. If you're very strongly for that, then maybe it's, might make sense to just.
3-0.
We're strong, so
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. It's really a matter of, do you want their opinion on this before, to take that into consideration beforehand, since we didn't discuss that, but we'll determine.
Yeah,
how
we'll
best
figure out
to
what
do
that process needs to be, if
I
anything.
think- Yeah, I think that's more of a question of how many things are we changing?
Yeah.
You know, if this is just the only thing we're changing, well, okay, easy peasy. If we've rewritten the whole document, then they probably want to have a new look at it.
Right.
But we're halfway through, we're ready, right? So,
Alright,
okay.
Alright.
cool, good discussion.
So, let me find where this is actually written specifically in here.
Are you on to?
We're in that same section.
With the lots and easements, is that?
Yeah,
what you're
with the
talking about?
lots and easements, and let me just see where that actually is located.
Page
Okay.
17.
I said mine doesn't have draft.
Okay, so with flag lots, so we're under lots, lot frontage, and it references flag lots in there.
17.
That's something I had to look up, because I read this before I looked at it, and find out just what.
Oh, the thing about a flag lot?
God, I don't know what, I never heard the term.
So basically, it's where it's got the stem, and then the lots in the back.
Currently, the ordinance just
Actually, it
says,
could be a corner, like that would be a flag lot too, wouldn't it?
No, you don't.
So currently, the ordinance just says that, from memory here, but the flag lots less than the minimum width stem dimension shall not be allowed. And it literally never says what that minimum stem is, so I think you're left to infer, or maybe it's 66 feet, if that's what we're talking about, a roadway width in terms of access back there, but it was never defined, and so we put that in there that,
My question on that, and I highlighted it first because I didn't know what it was, then I put a question mark there after I found out what it was. What's the necessity behind that?
we're
It's
looking.
not landlocked.
Behind the flag
Well,
lot.
okay, and I see where you've got an easement, so if somebody has an easement, they could be landlocked?
No, you can't have a landlocked parcel, so you either have to have the stem for the flag lot, or you have to have an easement on somebody else's property.
They've got
Yeah,
one in
back to
Wise
it.
County that's been
Yeah.
going back and forth in court. They've used it for years, and
That's
finally the
exactly-
landowner said, you
That's
can't,
exactly why we want to hear.
you can't.
And we're also adding stuff in here specific to easements, because there really was, it's kind of been up to our discretion every time, because people will come in with, oh, I want 20 feet. They just assume, well, how much feet should I be doing? And they inevitably come up with shorter than what everyone would prefer, and so we think that that's important to outline that, as well as flag lots, what that width should be, because up until now, it's kind of been a free-for-all, or what, each person, what do they think is appropriate for that?
Let me ask another dumb question. Is this like secondary roads? If you're gonna have something out there, if you're gonna have the subdivision, if, you know, it doesn't matter where it is, you've gotta go to secondary road and say, well, I wanna put in a driveway here onto something like that. Secondary roads has to look at it and say, how far away are you from a curve, or how close to another driveway or something like that. I'm assuming that's what
It works smooth. They still have to get a permit from us, and these guys do a nice job of passing them on to us.
Okay.
Yeah, so,
So they may need to move their flag. I made somebody move their stem. That's the one I was talking about,
That was
up on
like
Dodgeville Road.
last week or 2 weeks ago.
Because
that we
their
talked, yeah.
stem came out in a spot where it didn't have full sight distance. So they had to ask.
That was an
for the survey.
easement, but that was the
Well,
same
it's a
thing,
stem. It
yeah.
doesn't matter if it's an easement or not, we're
Right.
talking about the same thing.
Anyway, but when, back to my original question, short of the necessity, and so after I looked through his and talking, that's kind of the necessity is where
Guaranteed access.
guaranteed access, and then you can't put it up there right in the edge of a curve, so you can't see anybody until they're 15 feet from you.
But also a key thing is just in terms of if you've got a house here and you've got another house you want to build back here, and there needs to be access back in there, we want to make sure that there's enough room that there's no risk of, if somebody comes driving through here, or however they're using the property, does the neighbor feel like they're being encroached on by that access? We want some breathing room to have that stretch going back in there.
Well, and it's also, I mean, some width is necessary because you're also talking about the potential emergency response. getting
Right,
in.
right.
I mean, you only need 20 foot to get a two-wheel path back to a house, but if you're trying to run a ladder truck or an ambulance, or trying to meet a truck coming out for water where you're going in, there's a little bit of that dynamic, and that's the reason to have a width in there, to not have it pinched down to nothing, if at all possible, I guess, but.
Same way you gotta have a turnaround down there, be able to turn around.
I'm just, you guys have two different widths in that paragraph. You have a 50 foot if there's already development, you have 66 foot if there's not already development. I understand that you're assuming that you're making them go to 66 if there's not already development beside it, because you think it might be a future subdivision road or something like that, but it just seems messy to have two different widths. I'm still a minimalist, and 66 foot's a lot. I just want to point out you got two different widths there, and I'm assuming that was the reason you've got two, is if there's already developments, I guess you're assuming that the people that are living beside it won't use that?
I mean, yeah, if it's hemmed in by residential lots on all sides, and there's really no feasibility to, like, if you got a cornfield or a wooded area back there where conceivably somebody could subdivide that in the future, we wanna make sure that there's enough enough space there to accommodate that in the future. So that, you are right in how that, you interpreted that.
66 foot, that's what you got on county roads, regular
Yeah.
county roads.
Minimum.
You really wouldn't need that going back into subdivision.
Well, I think we call it out somewhere else in subdivision, don't you already call it somewhere else, as if they're gonna do a brand new subdivision, don't you require a 66-foot easement for the road, for the general access for a multi-lot subdivision?
Yeah.
If you have to build a
Yeah.
street, yeah, you gotta have
I
60.
think it links to that
Yeah,
also,
go
I just
section
wanted to
A.
mention it.
Private roadways, right?
And that's already the
Yeah,
case.
which is, so that's, and I think we could almost do it is, and say, you know, if you have the criteria for that be the same criteria for a private roadway, might already get us there, should we?
I guess the only thing I'd comment
Because
is.
is that a private roadway, or is that, are we leaving room for future development?
If it's a single-use primary roadway, you don't really need 50 foot. That's one thing I would mention. I mean, you need,
A single, use roadway.
35 or
What
40
would make that
foot.
change? What would make a single, what would cause that to change?
well, the reason you're allowing them to go with the narrow is because there's residential development on both sides already. So you're assuming that it's not going to be used by a future subdivision. So you're assuming that use
You've got a
remains minimal.
road here, you got two houses, one right next to each other, and somebody's got a lot that they bought behind them. And they need access, so you'd have a strip to, in between these two houses. So we'd give them a narrower path there because they can't build on, do anything on either side, or necessarily, I suppose feasibly maybe do something to behind it, but.
Because how much room, look, good, should be section D right next, should be saying how much room are we requiring for private roadways?
We're on 16, right?
I believe.
I think the one you have is a different.
Okay.
I think it's off.
It's where it's got
Yes,
those diagrams.
yes,
Five
that
block,
diagram,
nine
yes.
block lot
Next, you should have
examples,
private
okay.
roadways.
Thanks,
That's
Zach.
right here.
Yeah, so what's the width?
Minimum
No.
width should be 66.
Yeah, you just got the overview, I know.
Okay, so 50 is in fact less than that,
Right.
okay.
This right here is what.
So it's allowing an accommodation where we don't have to have quite as wide in those situations, but,
But the key thing was, though, it doesn't really give any direction in the current ordinance and what those should be, and so you were getting,
Nope,
some
that's
people
fine.
give 15 feet, some people give
I would
40
yield to
feet.
you guys and county engineer, I don't have any idea how many feet you would need on something like that, that's
If your logic is that you are allowing narrower because you don't think it'll be used going forward by anybody other than the person
Right.
putting it in, you really don't need 50 feet. I mean, you just don't. You need, and you don't even, technically, we don't even care that they put in their own drainage and stuff. I mean, you want them to have access, you theoretically, to me, the controlling thing is could
right,
a,
utilities is another thing to consider, that's right.
but utilities can go anywhere if they plan ahead. You're just thinking, in my head, you're just thinking, could emergency response get in and out without being head on? So, and you're talking about like a 3-wheel cart path in terms of that situation. So really, you can easily do that in even a 30-foot strip if it's for access. That's gobs plenty. Most of my roads are less than 30 foot wide. When you think about roadway width.
When
So
he pinches them,
I'm
they're only
trying to
7
think, what was
foot
that one
wide.
like,
Then when he pinches them, they're only 7
Yeah.
foot wide from the emails.
You got that.
True.
Oh, that was only 60, yeah.
Let's just talk about this,
That was the
and
issue.
then we'll run it by the board, what we think. We don't have to
I
step
mean,
on it.
yeah, we can mod, but the key is we need something there.
Right, that crown.
But,
I
I
think
mean,
guidance-
I remember there was, part of this is that issue, I can't remember where it was at, what street was that off of, Tick Ridge subdivision.
It wasn't the subdivision itself, but it was part of that
was-
same property that was being
Tick
split off
Ridge.
from.
Yeah, it was one we did last year. I
Last year,
think.
we're running that.
And it was a one lot, but then there was
Where's
some other
that at?
property that
Yeah.
was to the back, and it
Beaver
left
Hill
this
Road.
little strip that was
Yeah.
only 16 feet wide, and then the two people somebody decided to build a house back there after they bought it, and then it was running off of everybody's property, and they were getting
Wonderful
mad.
name for a
and calling it,
subdivision, Tick Ridge.
Tick Ridge.
Doesn't it depend a lot too on the topography, whether or not 50 feet would give them enough room to
Right.
build that road and drainage and.
It could,
all of that.
Now, in a lot of these dimensions and stuff, I know when I did my review, we're talking 4 or 5 months ago now, but, can't remember if it was Iowa DNR or actually Iowa State University had a document they put out with recommendations for subdivision codes. And so some of these, as we look at some of these dimensions, and I was kind of looking to see how we lined up. And we were spot on. When you look at things like the cul-de-sacs, these turn ratios, these, the hammerheads, they were talking about them, and your numbers matched up. So I don't know if you got them from a similar place, but, some of these numbers were matching up with what, I think things that were being suggested from outside actors.
I think
Yeah.
50, we were modeling off of how because Wildlife Lakes, they had several where there's flag lots like that, where they were, in the past, the narrowest I'd seen was 50 feet.
I'll tell you what, I think Brian hit on something, that's something you guys can discuss.
We can
with
figure
you.
it out, and then
It's-
when we
if
present
you
it,
need
we'll let you know
45
if we
foot or
did change
38
it.
or 55, whatever you
I
need.
think maybe 30, maybe
I-
I wouldn't think any less than 33, but maybe 33 would.
As long as, as the county engineer, you guys are, we're unlikely to say we need 6 more feet.
What kind of drainage you need? You take this room's 20 foot wide. You could meet 2 cars in this room.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know?
that's true.
That's different though if you're talking about like an ambulance or
Then
a
you
fire
gotta have
truck
your,
or something.
huh?
Depends on who's
If
driving.
you got a fire truck or something, that's a little bit
I
different.
You're saying
understand
from here to there.
But if you got a 1 or 2 house subdivision back there, you're not gonna be meeting anybody
Yeah.
coming in. 2 fire trucks to meet on a road that's 20 foot wide.
Well, it doesn't necessarily mean the road is that
No,
width, it's
but
just
but
in
I'm
the
saying,
road.
then figure out what your drainage is on the side, so a 30 foot, 33 foot would be plenty wide.
Well, we'll discuss it and then we can, when we bring it back, we'll just know what the final.
Bump that up to 40 foot.
Yeah, and all of these, we don't wanna have it to where the zoning board, or you guys, or both, are constantly looking at and making, amendments, tweaks, yeah. We wanna make this.
Or
so
waiving
that-
it in cases where somebody
Yeah.
asks for, because that's,
Right.
the lack of, that's why the lack of detail historically has resulted in a lot of instances where we're waiving requirements, because they're not
We don't wanna
clear,
get
or
into
they
what
don't
we got in
specify
last year on that
exceptions.
Subdivision with that really narrow.
Yeah, that was a tricky one. I don't even know if there was
Yeah.
something we could have done about it, just because I don't know that was directly tied to the subdivision. That was
Right.
more of a, the subdivision was over here, but it was the access to this parcel
Yeah.
was this little strip.
And it's very
The
unusual to
leftover,
have a
it's,
strip where they own it outright. It's not just an easement, but they actually own it, and it's that narrow, so it's somewhat unusual case
Yeah.
anyway.
that was an unusual one. I don't know if we could have done anything
could
about
happen
it, but it
again.
was, but that little strip, it makes you think for future subdivisions,
Yeah.
if they're getting the strip, it needs to be wider than
Exactly.
16 feet.
And the other complication there was the key one was the fact that they were able to, based on the way the land had currently sat, that it didn't trigger a subdivision since it hadn't been split before, and they were essentially just purchasing existing lots and building homes on them that were landlocked, so.
Well, and see, there's the whole other thing, if they're not gonna trigger a subdivision, they're gonna do whatever they want, really anyway, so, on occasion.
Alright, should we keep rolling here? We're,
Yep.
I don't know, maybe halfway
So-
through, a little more than halfway through. Roadway, driveway width?
Oh, well, so, here this is,
Hey, real quick on page 18, Jared.
Yep.
Very bottom, item D. Minimum right of way width for corner lots shall be same as any other lot along the roadway. Whenever applicable, corner lots shall be rounded to ensure that no less than 22 foot of buffer space exists between the right of way and the roadway surface. How about you just be shaped instead of rounded, so they could just put a diagonal line in on their plats instead of having a radius that someday's gotta be all staked out for a surveyor that wants to survey it. It just makes for simplicity and saving money someday.
So what's the term?
Shaped or something that's not specific
Just so it's
to-
like,
Yeah, you're
instead of like
eventually
trying to
looking
do
for
it.
something pretty, you don't need something pretty.
Okay, that makes
Ryan
sense.
just doesn't wanna be out there as long.
Hey, when you survey, you make it as simple as possible, it saves people money.
Okay, that makes sense. Let me see, so this, allow for accommodations to be made on existing roadways will be used for subdivision lots. So this is dealing with,
Where you at?
I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, that's why I was trying to find it too, cause I know it's in
I kind
here.
of summarized this section. But so when we're looking at surfacing dimensions of the roadway, because there have been a number of instances in the past where we've had to deal with roadways that were established prior to the ordinance, and they don't comply with the standards, but maybe there's a piece of land along that roadway that somebody still wants to subdivide. How do we make accommodations there to allow that land to be subdivided without requiring that the whole roadway be upgraded because they've been allowed, that's been grandfathered in, and it serves a number of lots. And so historically, when those issues have come up, we've discussed that with fire departments, with, in some cases it's within a 2 mile of the city. We've discussed having accommodations such as having turnarounds placed at intervals to allow emergency response for vehicles to pass one another. So that's where we address in surfacing dimensions, having where a subdivision will be directly served by existing roadway less than 22 feet wide, because the 22 feet is our standard. If they're building new, the minimum width requirement may be waived. However, in such circumstances, at least one surface turnoff shall be provided to allow for vehicles to pass one another. And then additional turnoffs may be required depending on the length of the roadway. And so the dimensions are shown there. And then another accommodation, which has also been brought up, is the use of the hammerhead. Actually, I think that's relates to cul-de-sac length. But also related to the driveway width, this was an amendment back in the 2000s, and this has been cause for some issues over the years where you have a roadway that previously has been shared by it's either one house or shared by 2 houses. So the trigger is that once 3 or more houses are sharing the same driveway, that it needs to be upgraded to roadway width, 22 feet, and have the same surfacing standards of a roadway. And so we added a stipulation here that clarifies that if that is the case, then you don't have to widen the entire thing to 22 feet, it just has to be the portion of that driveway that's shared by 3 people. So there's a diagram in here on page, I have it as page 22, where you got 3 houses, and it shows the widened portion here up to house 1, but then houses 2 and 3 can have a standard driveway width because those are just 2 homes at that point. So that's
Yes.
that's
You're
that's
on one short, maybe
121,
yeah.
yeah. So that's modifying that just so it's clear that, hey, you don't need to widen that entire roadway all the way back to the last home. So that's just a method of clearing that up. I think that was probably the intent initially, but it didn't specify that. And then one other roadway accommodation with cul-de-sac length, that's 1 page prior, it has the hammerhead illustration on there. And this is when we had a lot of discussion on with the zoning commission, because initially, the ordinance had a requirement, a minimum cul-de-sac length of 1,000 feet, which refers to, when we say cul-de-sac, we're not talking about the turnaround itself, the bulb. We're talking about the distance between the nearest intersecting road and the end, the dead end, the turnaround, whatever. And so there was some clear opposition to that with our zoning commission that because based on the topography of the county and the outline of how these typically are laid out, there would be a number of situations, there's a number of situations even today where 1,000 feet, it's considerably higher than that. And so we ultimately decided to,
I apologize, what do you mean considerably higher, where it's longer than that?
yes.
Longer than 1,000 feet.
Instead of it being 1,000 feet to the cul-de-sac, it's 1,000, 1,100 or 1,200, something like that.
Right.
Yeah,
50
we
for
probably
2,000.
have some that might be 2,000
Yeah.
or something.
And then there's a number, they also cited that there's a number of county roads, but, I mean, this is the way it's been, it wasn't designed purposely this way, but this is the system we've inherited where, like, you've got Y Camp Road, Sullivan Slough Road that goes a considerable distance. And so they were arguing that we shouldn't have a higher standard for the private roadways based on that. And so ultimately, the compromise we reached is that we remove the minimum cul-de-sac length entirely, but require that for any instance where it exceeds 2,500 feet, then you need to have a hammerhead turnaround of some kind, which could conceivably be the same. Ideally, it would be a driveway that would be surfaced to the standards of a roadway so that those could be used as a turnaround for emergency vehicles. Because the argument was made that, well, if you just require an arbitrary hammerhead wherever, or some kind of paved turnoff area that's only used for that purpose, that conceivably that it could just, if people just use the bare minimum surfacing standards, it just gets overgrown with weeds over the years and nobody maintains it.
don't even know it's there.
And so that's why if we're requiring that, it needs to be something that we can be assured is gonna be available in the event of an emergency. And so that's, ultimately, there was a lot of give and take there. We had initially proposed keeping the 1,000 feet minimum, but allowing the exceptions, and based on that argument, we decided that, the commission decided ultimately that the minimum that they would allow is requiring the hammerhead turnarounds, 2,500 feet. And this is all centered around discussion with emergency response. And we've had a number of subdivisions like that where, like in Burlington, for example, it's 750 feet, and there have been a number of instances where there have been challenges meeting that, where the fire department has said that in the absence of that, they'd like to see sprinklers installed beyond that distance, which, so there's always some give and take about what minimum level of protection are we supposed to allow here. So ultimately, what we have here is a considerably less strict standard than what we get in the city, and but it's something, so that there is a basic standard there that if you are talking an excessively long length, 2,500 feet or more, then you gotta have a turnaround of some kind along that stretch.
And I would think if somebody were to go ahead and put in, say, a gravel length and a gravel turnaround, and it was to be overtaken essentially by weeds, like you're saying, over time, if an emergency vehicle came in there, that should still be raised up enough that they can, I mean,
Can they
assuming
even
it's
see
not
it?
spraying.
The
but-
issue is, do they even know it's there because it's so overgrown?
Well-
The surface is solid enough, but they wouldn't even know it's there.
This is all great dreaming
Yeah.
and stuff, but this would be completely unenforceable and probably very unrealistic that it'll ever happen. I don't think it's bad to have in the language, and maybe it can be used someday after the fact, when all of a sudden there's a fire and they've realized that it never got built, or it was the minimum, because who was not going to do the minimum as far as scratching a little rock on it if they can get away with it, and everything else. My only question on this whole thing, because I don't think it's realistic, and I don't think I'll ever hear the day when this is enforced until possibly later, when the fire department's unhappy because they couldn't find anywhere to turn around because they're dealing with the fire after the fact, is that do you need an easement, an emergency use easement, a question for Trent, on the plat when they do the subdivision plat, so that whoever ends up using, you're talking about an existing driveway that may not be owned by any of these people, you know, maybe it's 25 years from now, lots have sold, bought, sold, everything else. Do you need something recorded with the plat, basically an use easement, giving emergency response the right to use that? Now, emergency response will never know which driveway has that, but if push comes to shove and the landowner says, I'm sick of the fire trucks turning around in my driveway, or the ambulances, because this guy at the end can't take care of his health, and they're in here once a month, and I'm sick of that, do you need anything so that they can't essentially say, I'm tired of it, quit turning around in my driveway?
It should be in the platting, so in the final plat, it'll be in the final plat, right?
Well, but it's gonna look like a driveway on the final plat that doubles as a hammerhead. My question is does there need to be any language? I don't care, I'm just throwing it out there, because these things are gonna go through a platting process, the subdivision's gonna get approved, maybe the developer comes in, builds the road, maybe he does the hammerhead, maybe it gets overlooked because you don't go out to the site all the time, every time they're doing stuff. I'm just asking for in perpetuity, when we're talking 20 or 30 or 40 years down, is there anything at all? I don't care either way.
In the plat, it should show it as a
Makes
general
sense, but
roadway.
Still, that hammerhead, couldn't you put that hammerhead like they do, like a retention center? If you got a retention pond out here, they'll put a hammerhead in toward that and then houses on both sides of it. It wouldn't have necessarily have, if you got the drainage, you wouldn't need that retention center. But you
But
can
they're
still put that there and
It's just, my only point is that they're using this hammerhead as also somebody's driveway.
yeah.
I mean, that's
Potentially, it
all.
doesn't have to be.
No, and I'm good with that, I don't have a problem with
What?
it. I'm just
It wouldn't
saying,
have to be in somebody's driveway when you can put it here and you're just not gonna build on that piece.
Right, basically the idea is there's given flexibility to say either you can build this standalone hammerhead, or if somebody builds a house, you
Put an
can,
easement in that
you can
driveway.
have the driveway there instead of building a whole separate.
I like the concept, I don't have a problem with it. I'm gonna let, if somebody's driving down my road, I'm gonna let emergency response turn around my driveway any day of the week. That's how, and most people would. I'm only asking long-term protection, big picture.
Right.
Should
I
there
get
be
what you're
some language referencing that the entrance to lot whatever is intended to be utilized as an emergency turnaround hammerhead? And that way, someday if there's a push comes to shove, there's something there, I don't know, I'm just asking.
I think that's gonna have to be drawn into that platting.
My thought though
If
is,
it's not drawn
possibly.
into the platting, then it won't be the
Not-
requirement.
Won't be recorded really, if it's not,
Right.
but.
my question though is, if we're talking about emergency response, is that something where, I can understand easements for the purpose of private access to properties, but is that even something that's necessary if you're talking about a public purpose such as emergency response? Is that even, or do they essentially have the right to use whatever it's a roadway access to a property to turn around?
It doesn't mean people don't bitch.
Specifically, as he's talking for a turnaround, because what's the necessity? Somebody can argue, well, there is no necessity for this one to be a turnaround, because there's a driveway 50 feet down the road, 100 feet down the road. Why? So most of what you're talking about, we get permission, and not necessarily permission, but it's necessity, right? Why do the ambulance get to speed? Because if they don't, somebody's gonna die, there's a necessity, right? Why does the fire truck, as they're leaving, get to turn around in this driveway as opposed to that driveway? That's not a question of necessity, there's multiple places to turn. So an easement is a good thing, but as we're saying, as it's platted, we're platting this, we're requiring that they either have a cul-de-sac or they have a hammerhead, so that's gonna have to be shown as roadway, and you're even showing it here as roadway.
Right.
Right, so they may be able to use it as a drive to their garage or whatever, but it's specifically stating it's roadway. So we platted as roadway.
But what exactly does that look like in terms of when we record a subdivision? How is it specified that going forward, if it's simply labeled as that purpose on the plat, that this is for emergency vehicle turnaround, is that sufficient, or does it have to specifically say have an
The
easement line
plat-
platted
the Platting
at,
has the same legal authority as an easement.
okay.
I mean, it's apples and oranges. I mean, it's not even apples and oranges. It's like, a little cutie versus the other orange right next to it. They're all oranges. It's got the same legal effect.
Maybe just,
Whether it's
as
in the
long,
plat or
as it
it's in
says
the
it in
easement.
here that this is to be included on the plat, because that's what I was thinking it would be automatically, but maybe that's, if it doesn't specifically say that, someone could just say, oh, I'm gonna put it here.
Okay.
Guaranteed
I
it
think,
lasts
I think we
long.
can figure out the language on this one separately. I think it's a good thing to bring in. Let's keep rolling. We're almost through it. I think the next one is probably the fence regulation one. That was probably the
Oh,
next.
boy.
Oh, boy. I was gonna say that's probably the next big one.
I got a simple one, 21, page 21, additions to public county road system.
Yeah.
Eliminate the whole damn thing. Get rid of it. We don't even need to debate it.
Which one's that?
Page 21 or 22, whichever it
Well,
says.
that's another one where we, realistically, that doesn't, that's been in there historically,
It's
and.
not anymore.
Well,
I-
my
we don't
thought
do
was
it.
just, it was
We
just.
don't take people's roads. Why even have it
Oh,
in
yeah,
there?
we've talked about, yeah, okay.
Which bullet point are we looking at?
The additions, additions
down at the
to
bottom.
public county roadway system, and it gets into different types of asphalt and concrete and stuff like that. We have a big enough road system, we're not taking anything on, don't even give them the hope.
If you're that confident, then I guess that's.
I am that confident.
Alright. 50, 60 years from now, yeah, okay. All right.
We're 3-0.
You'll be an old man when
Everybody's gonna show up at
Don't worry
the
about
next
it.
meeting and go.
What?
Everybody's gonna show up at the next meeting and be like, "No, you're gonna take my road whether you like it or not."
Okay.
Tell you a little story about a road.
That's fine with us. I don't think we have an
Thank
issue
you.
with that.
Brian closed the road.
I think that was just like Jared said, that was just in there, and so it was.
I told Brian, I said, Brian, if you'd open that road up, you got these gates there, I could save myself 2 miles of driving. I'm a quarter of a mile from this house to pick these people up. But we closed the road up.
Bus
He
route?
looks at me and says, your signature's on that when we did that.
It
Way to
was.
go, Jim. You were sleeping that day, weren't you?
No, I know why it's closed, because
It was a landowner request.
he
Uh,
owns land on the whole side though.
Another real quick one, Jared,
Yep.
that doesn't need debated, bottom of page 22. You get into corrugated, you get into culverts.
Yep.
I would make that a 12 gauge culvert. I'm just simply looking out for the people that are gonna buy that lot eventually. A 16 gauge culvert's gonna be rusted out in about 4.5 years. So I'd make that a little better quality as far as the corrugated metal. Make that developer.
I think that was one we discussed at the zoning commission meeting.
Yeah, that was one where it was in, if that was, 16 was the standard now, and they just thought that, wanted to make sure we checked with you and verified with, is that what your
Oh, is that
standard
one you were
is?
asking over?
Yeah,
we were trying to ask you about that one. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but make that.
No, that's fine, we got it.
Well, okay, got it.
It's a heavier steel, it's got life to it.
Alright, we wanna do the fence one.
Yeah, let's go ahead with that. So
Page
that's,
is that?
Page 24.
it's the section J fencing, or as the original ordinance put, section whatever, purpose.
Purpose, yeah.
'Cause it
You wouldn't even know it was about fencing.
Because it was prepared, it wasn't formatted properly initially, because that was added as an amendment in '05. This one's specifically trying to clarify the language on fencing so that number one, the initial standard minimum fence was a DOT spec fence there's certain standard that it cites in there, and that we were looking to make that more flexible because that's a pretty strict standard, and so we, in discussion with the zoning commission, ultimately decided.
There's been another ordinance on the fencing since 2005.
What?
We went through that with
Dale Oaks.
Huh?
But we
Yeah,
didn't
well,
change
yeah.
it, but we didn't change it. But I think it was made, well, I don't remember when that ordinance was made.
I'll say, I
but when
don't
it came
think
through
we-
here,
we're not
we didn't
fine.
change it, Dale had his own interpretation of it.
We added something, I mean, Dale was pushing for a fence ordinance, or as part of the ordinance, and that did get added. Then I think it came back up again, I'm not sure, it didn't have to do with the type of fence or something at
Well,
that
like
time.
with, Ed Blows last time,
Yep,
Well,
Yeah.
because they had that, whatever that
that came up.
fence, and that, but I don't think we changed it.
We didn't
No,
change
we
anything
didn't
when that
change
blow thing
anything,
came up, no.
But it came up.
It did come up.
but what we did on that fencing on Ed Blows is what we should really go with.
I think I mean, I talked to Dale about this whole thing. He wants to make sure the intent is still there, that the protection for that farmer's there. If the resident comes out and wants to build, they need to do a fence. But he wasn't opposed to flexibility, they did need to be, if somebody wanted a different type of fence, that there could be some flexibility to that. As long as the guy that's getting infringed on had some say in the whole thing.
I'd like to go back before we go in this fence thing and find out what we did on that, because we got that down someplace where we did, because it ended up where the subdivider dividing the ground was responsible for the fence.
Mhm.
And the fence has to be put up before it's put up.
It has to
And
be signed off before we,
Signed off before,
or erected before we
yeah,
approve it.
and it had to be,
Be a DOT, it has to be a DOT spec fence.
When it was
correct?
DOT, it
Well,
was
then-
42-inch hog wire with 3
Yeah.
strands of barb or
Yeah.
something
Yeah,
like
I
that. It
remember
was a
that.
tough fence to build.
Oh, did we have
It
somebody
was.
complain about that when I first got on? They said the fence wasn't right or something like that, or?
There's been complaints about the fence thing a long time.
And,
yeah.
There's been a lot of misunderstanding about what it's even for, because that's why we wanna clear up the
well,
language
it
in there,
protects
because.
It protects the farmer and
I
also
know.
protects some kid getting in there and getting run over by a boar or something and knocking down.
I think Dale wanted to enforce that fence and not let anybody waive it.
I can't remember. I really don't.
Because there was
but-
somebody there, and anyway, and I don't remember whether it was impractical to build or they agreed, whatever it was. He wanted that fence built. He
Yeah.
wanted that developer paying for it.
But
Well,
the waiver's been there forever and it's worked, I think, pretty well. in
Yeah,
general.
no, but I think that's what the argument
possible.
was, is that he wanted that fence built, and they were gonna waive it or not build that fence, and so he insisted the fence got built. And whoever it was that was building it, they either somebody waived, waived the fence, or waived and let him build some little different fence, and Dale was unhappy about that we didn't force him
That's
to do
before I
that.
got on the board, that one. And then when I got on the board, because they'd already had that fence law, and then he came in and.
Well, that was, and that's, when we had with Ed Blow.
With Ed Blow, and then,
That's, but that's what Dale wanted. He wanted that fence to have to be built whether you waived it or not.
yeah,
And it wasn't his land.
no, it wasn't his land.
But he wanted to interpret that, and once we didn't do it, then he wanted the whole fence ordinance. He said, just throw it out.
Well, that was.
That was just Dale. Of course, he'd been there, he'd helped him create that, because he wanted a fence
Oh,
ordinance
I
before.
know, I
Yeah,
sat
that
in
was
here
back
many
then,
a meeting with Dale.
That was 2007, 8, something like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. But when he come in, as I recall, I'm almost sure, he wanted that fence built. He didn't want anybody to be able to waive that.
Yeah,
He said you can't waive it, and we eventually let them waive it because, I don't
well, that
remember.
was only a one lot subdivision. That-
I don't remember what the
They were
subdivision
going,
was,
but-
but he was unhappy about that.
That Greg, from that KPI, started that subdivision.
Craig Upton.
That's Craig Upton, that's
Yep,
the Ed
yep,
Blow, that's the
yep.
Ed Blow situation.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, and that was,
Ironically, now you've got one of the people who owns a lot in there that's looking to buy a bunch of land.
Pretty much all that
Ed Blow.
land from Ed Blow.
That's that.
Somebody
yeah.
in that
Yeah,
subdivision from Craig Upton is
Yeah.
planning to buy all of Ed Blow's property,
Yeah.
so.
Well, not all of it.
A
except for his
lot of it,
house.
yeah, most of it. So,
wants to buy that and start a subdivision there.
I
That's what I heard, I don't know.
I have no idea. Hope not.
Yeah. Why?
Why not?
It's,
Hard to get back in
it's
there.
just a really
I'm guessing.
crazy terrain and
I'm
not
guessing
very
it's 100.
easily accessed.
Not
Yeah, I
easy to
think,
access. It's
we
just
were
down
informed
in
it was more for personal use and
lower.
stuff,
hunting ground.
but, yeah.
So in that language, I'll start into the conversation. I'm curious for maybe.
Sorry to interrupt you, but
No, you're fine. That's what the whole thing's about, is making sure everybody's on the same page. But when you get down into this, under that first paragraph, under fencing, it says responsibility for the maintenance of the fence shall be transferred to all subsequent owners of the same property to continue as long as the neighboring property is used for agricultural purposes. Okay, responsibility, I'm assuming, the responsibility for maintenance, but Trent, can we put language in there that somehow could contradict the fencing law of Iowa once the fence is established and moved on? And is
Well,
beyond the subdivision process?
And that's what, well, you're asking, can we? Well, no, that's gonna be superior law, right?
Oh, it's a- I don't know whether we should be getting into long-term, but there's another one or two
Well,
lines that I was gonna
Except
know.
for that one out there off,
Danville.
yeah.
Well, any other ordinance I've seen where counties regulate subdivision, or regulate fencing, there's always something like that in there about long-term maintenance, because I think that's seen as, well, once you've built it, what happens if there's conflicts in the future? If you got, especially because the main purpose of this is for situations where you've got a larger subdivision, where you've got what was previously 2 owners side by side, now you've got 10 owners here and still 1 here. Well, once the fence is built, well, that's great if it complies with the standards, but what if somebody along that stretch is not adequately maintaining that fence and it falls into disrepair over the years? Well, the idea there is that if there needs to be some sort of protection for that neighboring owner if it's not maintained.
The way I read this, and essentially, and we even get into fencing for different types of livestock and so forth, and it kind of, to me, the way I read it is like, we're gonna put in this subdivision, and you, the homeowner, are gonna have to pay for the maintenance of the farmer's fence, and that's gonna depend on what that individual farmer decides to use it for, and well, they're not getting any revenue out of that farm. It's kind of, it seems like it's, I guess, we could almost do somewhat like what the city of Burlington does, which creates some weird situations, but where they're saying, look, we want a fence, but you're gonna have to own property on both ends. So your fence is gonna be your fence, and you're gonna have to mow that strip behind it, and you're gonna maintain your fence. I think it's almost better to do that. Now, realizing a lot of this, if you're next to tillable land, we know those farmers are gonna, one row at a time, eat away at that over the course of the next 5-10 years, and they're gonna be up to the fence line anyways. But, to say that you're having property, homeowners in perpetuity pay for a fence, for, a fence line for farmers, and even those that may have livestock, well, heck, the cows get out and who knows where they got out, right? They're on the road.
What are we doing now?
Well, sorry.
oh, no.
I think we're basically, I was more, okay, my only question was the maintenance side of it. What's happening now is there's a fence waiver, and when the subject comes up, either the developer goes and gets the landowner or pays the neighbor to sign the fence waiver, or they put up the fence. There have been, I can think of maybe 2 or 3 situations where the board deemed the demands of the neighboring landowner to be unreasonable and has waived the fence law against the wishes of the landowner, right? There was just a couple of places, ravine type situation or something like that, where you couldn't build a fence if you wanted to. Otherwise, in general, what has happened is that it's gone through and either gotten built. I think way back when, there was a joke about a white vinyl fence or some sort of fence built dead end to dead end of a lot corner all by itself because the guy wouldn't sign off from the neighbors, so they built a fence. But that's how it's been handled as far as I'm aware. Nothing personal, Trent, I don't like your idea, sorry. I don't think you build a fence over and let them take care of both sides, because then you're gonna get into, you are absolutely, you're dead on what farmers are gonna do. They're gonna work their way over to the fence, these people aren't gonna care because they don't wanna mow it, and then you're gonna get into easement law and prescriptive stuff and adverse possession and all sorts of stuff where land is transferring because of long-term change in use and all that sort of stuff. And I agree with Jared. The concept that Dale wanted is I didn't ask these people to move out, so I want them to put a fence up. And Dale still wants that, by the way. In fact, you guys instructed me to communicate with Dale back, what, a year ago or something when this all got discussed? And I did. And the concept was they want to come out here, that's part of the cost of them coming out here and building beside this land over here. I don't want them in my field, I don't want them in my pasture, whatever it is. And Dale wanted the fence put up, and he wanted it maintained by them in the long term because he didn't want to try to apply the 50-50 Iowa fence rule to 8 different lots or whatever it is. All that's good and well. I don't think we've ever gotten to a point where maintenance of a fence has become a topic. I've never heard it yet. So that hasn't been a conversation. My only question was, as I sit here to think about now, is can we have language that governs maintenance of a fence? Because it's gonna get installed during the subdivision process, and then we go away. It's not like the county sits there and goes and babysits subdivisions in perpetuity. We don't. Sometimes they'll come back with complaints, and then they come up again, like the one on Glenmark, as far as the roadway width and stuff like that. But in general, we don't manage those. And so that was my only question as far as the maintenance. But I think the fence, the intent of it, and I would be scared, and I'm not the one that's gonna call Dale if you guys decide to change the intent, as far as them paying to put the fence in. It seems to have very, very kind of sort of roughly worked. Not perfectly, but worked. So.
I mean, what's in here is really the same intent, just clarified a little bit and more flexibility on the type of fence.
Understood. I understand what you're saying. My only question originally with Trent was, can we have language requiring that long-term maintenance? Would it be legal if push came to shove? We've never had it happen, so I wouldn't say that that's a subject now.
It came up to us once. We didn't really know how to handle or what to do, but I guess it really wasn't our
I think it's just making it clear that when the subdivision is recorded, that there's something tied with that property going forward, so that future owners of that if a conflict does arise in the future, that can be addressed, and keeping in mind that we do have the township trustees of the individual townships that are designated by the Iowa Code as for mediating fencing disputes, and so that's a way of looking at long-term, if a fencing issue does come up, that through the subdivision process, we designate that in the future, if issues come up, that there's a way of resolving that dispute, because it says you're supposed to be maintaining this going forward.
I also don't understand 2A.
I've gotta go get a COVID tested now, so.
That's fine. Take care of yourself. We'll see you in the morning.
Okay, I'll catch the rest of this yet, but I'll be here.
See you in the morning, Shane.
Thanks, Shane.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, if you have any comments for us, let us know.
Right, they're gonna haul you downstairs.
No, they gotta stick that stick up my brain to see if I'm sick.
I'll throw you out this window and you're shutting down this tree.
What'd you say?
He's being helpful.
Being helpful.
I
I
guess-
guess throw you out this window and you can shut down that tree.
Man, Jimmy's always so helpful, loved by all his peers.
But 2A on page 25, shared cost of fence, was that in there originally?
It may not have been worded like that, but I think it was.
Well, I just wonder why we need it. Because right now, by our fence policy, if you're gonna build a subdivision, you gotta either go get a waiver
Right.
Or build a fence.
or build a
Build a
fence. if you wanna work out a deal, why does the county wanna have any part of it? You work out a deal, and if you're dumb enough not to put it on paper, then that's gonna become a civil matter. But I'm just asking why we care about two-way.
We don't care if the fence gets built, we don't care.
Yeah, for us,
As long as they're-
it should probably just matter if it's been built or if they get the waiver.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I mean, that's just my.
I mean, I was gonna try and pull up the existing ordinance to see if it had a reference.
I gotta run across the hall, I know that. I mean,
And I guess the only thing, and you'd,
what's that trainer shade at?
Are you an alley? Well, do you want me to just bring it back up? Okay.
He's gotta go to the.
he's gotta go get
He's gotta go to the doctor.
test.
Why is everybody leaving? Does he need help? or-
No, he was just helping him for a minute.
Okay, thanks.
He'll be back. I think.
Jim had to make a trip across the hall.
Oh, okay.
and you, Brian, evidently what you talked to Dale about was the tight fence versus
Versus the one specific kind of
state
fence.
fence or whatever it
And
was.
he had actually even had a scenario, of course, he also had another landowner argument, but so, but he had a scenario where a neighbor had wanted a different kind of fence and he didn't care because it worked for whatever, and so he kind of understood that kind of type of flexibility when I had the conversation with him. So and this all references state code and fence, and I can't claim as I remember what all that said, but I think he'd be satisfied as long as they were still required to put up a fence that the existing neighboring landowner was acceptable with, or was willing to accept, I guess is the best way to put it. It gives a lot of leverage to the neighboring landowner. That's what the whole point of it was when
Oh,
it
there
was
it is,
done.
the fence thing. I
Yeah.
guess I found it.
Oh, yeah, the purpose.
So
but
the
that's
tight
kind of
fence is
seen it a million
is
times,
the
still have a hard
expensive
time
fence or
finding
that
it.
there's that,
I'm not sure.
okay.
But I get what you're saying, is you're saying it gives a lot of leverage to the neighboring landowner.
Hmm?
But,
Pretty much all the leverage.
but why, right? I mean, why does neighboring landowner get to tell, landowner A, landowner B, landowner C? Why does landowner B get to come in there and say?
Because Dale Oak sat down here for 2 years and yelled at the board and got support of the politicians and demanded it and got it.
To the extent where landowner,
The end of
the
that
new landowner
paragraph
comes
there,
in and he can change the,
It's pretty small.
use of that property if they've got livestock running there or something like that. Yeah, I mean, he's going to directly impose costs on them or limit the use of the existing property. And you're just saying, you've gotta leave, you can move in here, but you're
I don't
gonna
see
leave
it.
my properties, the
Is there recent
potential use
evidence
of that
with
the same as it was
reports of that one
before.
below?
It's just protection. I mean, Dale was frustrated back then
You gotta
that
go
people
to
were moving to the
one.
county, and he's a livestock guy, Dale's a livestock guy, and that he wanted the neighbors, because they do, they move in and they have absolutely no idea
That's what we're looking for.
about anything. But if they're not from the country, they don't have any idea, or they don't have the money, or whatever it is.
No, I think that's
So that's why,
just referring to
I
the
wasn't
overall
plus or
agreement,
minus, that's
whatever
just,
it may be.
I sat through it.
Yeah.
So.
But that's
You know,
what I'm
Dale,
saying,
I don't really have a problem with it either.
It's terrible, I
land
know.
that his own sister won't even talk to him.
I can believe that.
You know why?
I guess it's not clear that that's what it's talking
Kid
about,
up,
but I guess to me
my
that's,
Kid,
Hers?
her kid.
I do know Dale.
oh, no, okay, here it is. It's an all
But
adjoining
I think
owners.
that's the thought behind it.
Son is may agree in
And I can
writing
see where,
to not to
if-
recognize
if
or
you
to
don't want
sharing
people
costs
telling you
of
what
the
to do with
type
your,
of
if they
a
buy the
different
lot
type
next
of
year, all of a
fence,
sudden you can't use
other
it
than the
for
one that
the
meets.
livestock you've got there, or you run
Okay.
livestock
Or
there
exceeds
every 4
minimum
years when
standards.
you give the.
So maybe
land
that's
the
why.
rest.
but it's your
We did the shared
fence to
cost.
maintain though, I mean, that's what I'm saying, if you.
But I get the point.
If you
We
have-
even need to
Whether
worry
it's
about that if
cattle
it's,
or
Okay.
whether it's,
as long as it gets
Well,
installed, what do we
she-
care if they share the cost or not?
I mean, why would
And now
you-
that we give them more
why would you tell the
flexibility, it
old
doesn't even
neighbor
matter.
that he had to put a fence
that
there?
right?
Yeah.
Why would you tell the new neighbor they've gotta put a fence there? You see, and that's why I don't like the 50-50 law, and that's why I said, let's just avoid that, let's have the landowner require them to put it on their own
No problem.
land. But it will get eaten away, I mean, that's just gonna happen. But when we're talking about, you see what I'm saying? I mean, when I was a kid, I would go out and you know, if it was your turn to walk the fence line, you'd walk the fence line. And somebody did that every day, right? And you're not gonna tell a private homeowner that they're gonna go out and walk the fence line every morning.
But if we don't put maintenance in, they're not gonna do that.
Right.
So if we don't have maintenance, we just sit, if you're gonna put in a subdivision here, and there's agricultural land, you're gonna build a fence there, or you're gonna get a waiver that the owner on the other side doesn't want a fence.
But they should, I mean, if they have agriculture, they should, or if they have livestock, they should already have a fence.
And I would
It's
note, it
theirs.
wasn't just
They're
livestock,
trying to-
because
to-
It's
Dale's,
agricultural use.
well, Dale's
Lost
position
that.
was these people just wander. He's like, the next thing you know, you got people mushroom hunting, and they don't respect boundaries, and that is true of people in general.
Stuff in their yard that might
I mean,
blow
not
over
just-
into a field or whatever else.
I know what Trent's coming
Four-wheelers,
from,
like-
I totally
Or, yeah,
understand what he's
hop on
saying, I'm just
four-wheelers.
saying what
Or,
happened.
I think the previous discussion of pets and children too, that
Oh, yeah.
there's just no boundary there.
Yeah.
But I think the key thing is, like, regardless of whether there's a waiver or if the fence is required, something is getting recorded that acknowledges that that's the case, that's tied with the property going forward. And so by saying that it runs with the land, essentially, that there is a dispute in the future and it comes up to the township trustees that there's not maintaining the fence, well, here's your clear answer. The county ordinance says that if there's no fence waiver, then if the owner has to put up a fence, then it's their responsibility, and future owners of that land are responsible for maintaining it.
We're creating a new regulation that is gonna make this an order of magnitude harder for some people, because they will argue, even if you've got the fence ordinance, they will argue that maintenance until the cows come in. Would that be possible, Brian?
Well, anybody definitely can argue anything.
We're creating
I'm
something.
all actually for as minimal change. The reason we talked about making any change to this was trying to flex on the type of fence that was allowable. Otherwise, this is what got put in back during the whole lobbying process, and again, I'm not gonna be the one to call Dale if we make substantial changes, because I don't wanna be the one that he's directing his anger at. But,
I agree,
I mean,
the
don't
minimal
know-
changes,
I don't
you
know
just
who this
change the
guy
fence
is.
from tight to legal, or
He's just
legal
a-
to tight, or whatever it is.
an old boy farmer
Yeah.
with a bit of a temper.
To
Okay.
go real quick, to go back to your comment, Brian, about the 2A.
Yep.
That's in the existing ordinance. It's worded slightly differently, but there's something in there already about it, so that's why we put it in there, but.
Well, I mean,
But as we read it,
I didn't know.
I mean, I don't know that it needs to be in there, it's just,
Yep.
so I think we might just strike it.
The lawful fence.
2A, no, it's if
The
you go
shared
down
cost
about
of fence.
alternatives, it's one about shared cost of fence.
Oh,
It'll
yeah,
be
yeah,
reworded
yeah,
to just-
I've got that 2B, but yeah.
It was already in the ordinance, so we left it in there, but it kinda gets back to, at the end of the day, we don't really care how you pay for it, we just, you either build the fence or you get a waiver for it, so
Yeah,
it doesn't really apply.
When the guy starts the subdivision,
Well, no, it just says that you can share the cost of the fence, but what do we care how they pay for it?
Yeah.
And part of that originally was,
oh,
it
this-
specifically says the shared cost for a different type of fence too, so if we're already giving more flexibility on the type of fence.
That was
I
the
think it
previous
makes-
version before we
makes
met
even more
with the
sense to
zoning
get rid of it.
commission. And one of the changes, it's actually listed in this handout here under the changes recommended by the commission. Where at the last one, it says, change each instance of the term type fence to lawful fence. And then remove sub-item 2A referring to lawful fences, that one where it had 3 at the time. And so basically,
Which completely confused me.
well, so basically now the lawful fence is the minimum standard across the board instead of tight fence, which we had before, and now it requires tight fence specifically when the adjoining landowner has hogs, sheep, or goats, because that was the discussion there, is why is it requiring a tight fence for everybody when really it's only necessary in situations where those specific livestock, which are
Is the
hard to
tight fence more
contain.
expensive than the waffle fence?
What?
Is the tight fence, is that the new kind of fence that's a little cheaper than a lawful fence?
So if you go to state code, there's a thing about lawful fence and it gives,
Tight
I
fence
don't
is
know,
a
5 or
sub,
6 different types of fence, and tight fence is a subset of that.
and it's a
And
stricter
it's a
standard.
stricter standard.
Okay, so
And
now
way
it
more
says if you've
expensive.
got hogs or sheep or cattle.
Yeah.
No, hogs or sheep or goats, so not cattle. Cattle would be just the lawful fence.
I guess my problem with calling out what you've got in there, if you're gonna go to a tight fence or something like that, or change, is, if, it's just like somebody, I would agree with Danny Cahill, it would be a taking. If you've got corn in there and you put in corn there for 3 years, and then for a year you put in cattle or hogs or sheep or something like that, or maybe you want to say, you know, I'm gonna go into the, raising more hogs, I'm gonna open up that field to them. That's a Fourth or Fifth Amendment taking. Now, I don't realize it isn't the government taking it, but that's a potential use of your property.
A lot of livestock guys, even though they crop it during the year, will throw their livestock in, possibly a different kind of livestock, depending on what they are doing, into their crop field. So I would probably suggest that if it's an agricultural purpose, it probably should be a tight fence that they expect, and
Yeah,
they can negotiate their way out of it if they want to.
I don't think I would like to see that, just to mention the livestock. I'd like to see a type of livestock, just the agricultural use.
I'll tell you what, there's a lot of cattle out in these cornfields right now.
I know they put pigs out there in those
Yeah.
cornfields too, don't
Yeah.
they? Yeah. To clean up the, whatever.
Well, that would essentially be taking it back to where we have it
Well-
as written now, because the zoning commission had.
I thought there was,
Had to
when
go the other
we first
way.
talked about it, I thought there was, because there was a picture of the fence in the zoning ordinance.
No, it was the subdivision.
Well, subdivision.
Yeah, that was the
ordinance.
that was
There's
the
a picture of a,
excerpt from
you know,
the DOT.
Figure 1A or whatever,
Yeah.
you know, you've got.
Well, it's the
some-
panels, and then they have the
Yeah,
little squares like
some
that.
fancy looks like an expensive fence. I thought there was a different regulation for like tight fence or something like that it didn't need to follow those exact, you know, that could be less elaborate, as long as it's a tight fence that livestock can't get through. But we weren't gonna change the agricultural use. We were just gonna change it so that there were other kind of fences if the guy with the livestock would sign off on that.
Okay. So conceivably, then we would just go back to the way it was before, where the minimum standard is tight, but they could allow a lawful through an agreement if it didn't meet the standards of tight.
Basically.
Brian, yeah, I just don't, I would like to leave it for agricultural purposes. Like I said, if somebody says you don't have livestock in there right now, well, I might have livestock in there anymore.
Well, if there's no agriculture, then there's no fence regulation, so
Well,
it
that's
essentially only applies there
exactly, well,
anyway.
that's why it would be
Right.
agricultural use.
Yeah.
Because if somebody, you know, if I've just got to grow grandchildren, and I've got 10 acres there or something like that, and then I decide later I want to raise cattle or whatever, and I need a fence, then I can take care of that. The subdivider doesn't need to take care of that. But if it's agricultural use, anyway, I think I'll leave
Well,
that the same.
I think really, Tom, what you're talking about is, because we're talking specifically at the time of subdivision.
Exactly.
So that farmer could decide to change what he wants to do the next year, but that's what I'm saying. If, say, the farmer wants to go from, having tillable, that he lets cows in from years 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, to say he wants to then let in sheep or goats, whether or not there's a new property owner, he's gonna have to upgrade those fences.
The farmer will.
The farmer will,
Yeah,
yeah.
the farmer
Whether or
will.
not
That's
there's a
only
new
fair.
subdivision or not.
But if you don't, but if it's an agricultural use, you don't. If it's an agricultural use, you either have to sign a waiver or tell them I want the fence.
Or a tight fence.
I think the reasoning from the zoning commission that they were arguing against switching that around was because of the potential for what happens if somebody just refuses to sign the waiver and but there's no livestock, but if the minimum standard is tight, then that's just an additional expense on
Yeah,
the.
how much
is
is
on
that?
the-
I'm certain that happens, I'm certain
Yeah.
that's gonna happen, and that's that's something you're gonna run into, is somebody that probably doesn't want you there, and he says, I want the most expensive fence that I can get under this. So you're gonna
Right.
have to put it, that is a risk, but I don't think you go in there and you say, well, this is this kind of agricultural land. We don't think you run animals that are gonna be leaning on this, cattle lean on fences.
But
For
this is the thing, any fence that should be required, that landowner should already have.
Maybe not, because might have my farm over here, I might have been farming this cornfield, you know, this 20 or 30 acres over here. Well, I'm gonna start putting cattle in there to help feed them, you know, and he doesn't have the ability to do that if they don't have that fence and that subdivision on that piece
Right,
of
but
property
that's
that his
his-
other neighbor sold off to put that there.
And it's
But-
also
but
keeping
that's
the
what
other
I'm
side line
saying,
of your
he's-
property.
But if neighbor one, so you say you own property A and property B, right? Property A, property B. So landowner A, landowner B, I think that's a B, it's upside down to B, right? Okay, so say B decides he wants to put in livestock,
Yeah.
whether this is residential or agricultural, he has to make sure there's a fence line in there to take care of his now livestock.
But if that,
Otherwise, they're gonna run.
if that subdivision's in there, and when that developer builds that subdivision and
Yeah.
is required to put a tight fence in there, then he doesn't have to worry about whether he's gonna put it in or not. If that subdivider wants to build that subdivision, that's part of his expense, just like putting roads in or anything.
You're arguing that if they need a fence, they should already have it there. And we've already,
Yeah.
that's not in the ordinance. The ordinance has been that if you're gonna build a subdivision next to agricultural property, you either build a fence or you get a fence waiver. I don't think I wanna change it, or I'm not interested in changing it to livestock or just for agricultural use. Or going through that whole thing again and saying, well, if you need a fence, you should have had it anyway. The subdivider doesn't need to do that. This isn't, it's worked fairly well for the last few years.
Well, I think this,
I
as,
don't, but it hasn't, I mean, how many subdivisions do we have right across county lines from Henry County? I mean, so has it, or how much business are we losing as a county? How much tax base are we losing?
so ultimately, if as written here, if our minimum standard was lawful, but it would have to be tight if there was certain livestock, then there would need, the minimum standard is still a fence. It would just need to be a less strict fence that would fit the definition of lawful but not tight. And then if the neighboring owner decides to change to adding livestock there in the future, then that would be their responsibility if it didn't,
We've
if
gone
that,
around
if
this
that
several
fence
times.
didn't.
I'll just say right now, I would not vote for favor of that.
Okay.
It's gonna be a fence for agricultural
Just
purposes.
trying to
If you
clarify
can
it.
make clarify, I'm gonna make it real clear, agricultural purposes. And if you need a fence, if you can come up with a tight fence or a standard, however it is, so if you've got a tight fence that the other side agrees on, it does not have to be that fence in the figure 1A in the current subdivision ordinance. But I'm not interested in going down that path and changing that whole thing again and saying either you don't need a fence or you only need a fence if you've got livestock.
Okay.
What we've got now is serviceable, and it will stretch this thing out for a long time if you try to change that.
Okay.
And I don't,
All right. Make sure we're clear on that.
Good,
opposed to
what,
it.
say it's goats and pigs and what on that?
Sheep?
Sheep. Okay, you need a tighter fence for them.
Yeah.
Right.
You can keep cattle in with a 2-strand barbed wire that's
Right.
electrified,
Right.
you know.
Which I think is why it's written specifically
That's
for
right.
those.
That was
That's
through there.
And that cost, I mean, the cost between double strand barbed wire, even if you put electric on it, versus tight for sheep, or, I mean, it's extraordinarily different. I mean, I don't know the numbers.
No
but
argument with
that'd be a
any of
big
that.
difference.
Except that isn't,
Yeah.
that I'm certainly not gonna support any of those things. Otherwise you're gonna say, yeah, we'll put up 2 strands of barbed wire there. you're gonna have a fence. If it's agricultural uses, that's gonna go in there unless you can get a waiver from the guy. And if you can't, and I am confident that there are places where they're gonna make you put up the most expensive fence
Right.
they can.
Right.
And that's, when you make those, nothing's gonna fit every situation. You're gonna, a compromise. So anyway, so I wouldn't, and if there's a tight fence or a standard fence or a legal fence or however the hell it is, if you can come up, I don't know, you mentioned Dale said some other definition of fence, that it does not have to be that particular, you know, that there would be an option there, I have no problem with that. But, but the fence ordinance, if I'm gonna vote for it, the fence ordinance is that the subdivider puts it in or gets a waiver if he's adjoining agricultural property.
I think the way it's now, I don't think it's a matter, I think any neighbor you go to, you have to get a waiver or put fence in. It's
Is it?
just the flexibility that it's gonna be tight fence if it's agriculture related versus, or if the landowner's willing to go with a different fence because they don't care, or they just crop it and they're never gonna put livestock in it, they can say, no, I'll just take this other, which is the whatever you reference it to.
If they wanna do that.
But I don't think right now it differentiates that if you go develop, or you go put a lot in beside somebody, and I actually know the spot, I'm not so sure this isn't coming up on, I think they're having to build a fence on that Dodgeville property. I think that that farmer that's beside them is gonna make them build a fence.
I think they already put it in. I went
Okay, so
out
it's-
there once and they
it's
were,
in, so there you
clearing
go.
some trees.
It's
but yeah.
and he's gonna make him put that fence in, now he's got livestock, and I think the way this is written, the way the intention was, it's not just a matter whether it's agriculture or not, it was, this is your boundary, a lot of people don't respect boundaries, so we're gonna try to teach it to you, as just the layman's way is how I remember the conversation. However, if it's not agriculture related, and I would say in this situation, what Tom's saying is if it's agriculture related, you better go bargain if you want less than a tight fence. If you wanna put in less than, if you wanna save that money, like Trent said. Now, if it's not agricultural property beside you, then you're gonna put a fence in unless you get a waiver, but it's gonna be the lesser than tight fence, whatever that terminology was.
Lawful fence.
Lawful fence. And if you wanna get rid of all of it, go pay the neighbor off and get a waiver. That's what I think is happening now, except for really the whole conversation is just trying to provide flexibility, some other different types of fences than just the very one DOT fence that was in there. Right?
And I suppose if we're talking full-on subdivision, whether it's a tight fence or not, that's probably pretty minimal cost in the whole scheme of things.
I think most situations they can get a waiver, but if they've already rubbed their neighbors the wrong way, this is, I suppose, another point of leverage.
There's, I've seen come through, and I know there's a lot of times there's a fence waiver given, but quite, and I see everybody's point, it's a circular argument, it'll go on forever. There will be meeting after meeting after meeting in here, to
There
get
he
the whole
was.
ordinance approved. So I'm just saying, I would leave that, so, and if you can make it so it's a.
So I just want to be clear, so we want to change it so that you're required to have what I would think the tight
you're saying
fence.
keep it the same.
Well, if you can make it, and I don't know, if you,
I think the way it's.
if the guy next to you, and maybe is, I don't have that in front of me, I've got is that you have to put up a fence, whether it's agricultural or
Not
residential, whatever,
timber, whatever.
timber, whatever, you're supposed to put a fence up there. If you can talk, and what's it say now? It has to be that
It's, the,
expensive fence.
the big
DOT
conversation was
fence.
getting away from the DOT specific fence.
Yeah, that, and this is what, you know, I'm good with that, if you can get away with that particular kind of fence, make it cheaper so that it will work, so if somebody waives, I can't imagine you should be able to waive anyway. It says, if I've got livestock on it, I said, I don't like that DOT fence, I'd rather have another style, and work it out with the guy. But you gotta put in a fence, you gotta have a fence waiver. The subdivider does.
So I guess what I'm hearing you say, Tom, is we've already got a rule, it's already in the ordinance. If we keep it the same, well, it's kinda like dove hunting, right? you got 80% of the people who don't care whether you hunt dove or not, 10% who really, really want to hunt dove, and 10% who really, really think it's just the next thing, you know, worse to be in the Antichrist. And so nobody ever touches the law. And I think what you're saying is if we want this to go through and we try to change any of this, we're just asking for trouble.
You are, but this is not objective. What we're talking now is subjective as hell.
Yeah.
That's everybody's difference of fairness. You know, when I look at it, I come to you, I said, like I said, part of this is a Fourth or Fifth Amendment taking. You know, it isn't the government. You're gonna go, somebody, you've limited the use of their property. They have agricultural property. They own it. They can decide tomorrow they wanna go corn on it, they can go beans on it, they can go hogs on it. Whatever, that's their property. If I put a subdivision up next to them that takes away, with no fence, that either changes their decision or it takes away their rights. So I'm just saying, and you can argue the other way too. It's subjective. It's been decided. It seems to be working. I haven't, other than the one. Dale was here, and Dale just doesn't want anybody living in the county.
Well,
And that's fine. He just doesn't want anybody moving out there because it's for farmers, and he's certainly entitled to that belief. But so he's made an issue. But I think it's working well. I don't hear a lot of complaints when you guys show up with subdivisions. We ask or anything, or you just automatically tell you, you know, we have fence waivers, you know, signed fence waivers, and it works. Go ahead.
So essentially, that's the way it, because it's the latest draft since we went to the zoning commission that it was flipped around. So essentially, we keep it as is here, and this reference to the lawful fence is essentially the same as it is in the ordinance now, where lawful is essentially another type of fence. So the minimum standard is just going to be changed from the DOT spec fence to the tight fence, but then
Just leave it all the same.
among the alternatives, they can agree to a lawful, but that's part of the waiver process.
Well, yeah, you can agree to a lawful, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the standards of tight fence and
But it's pretty specific in state.
Trent is certainly right. There's gonna be people that take advantage of that because you're gonna build next to me and you don't like me. Or I'm gonna build, you know what I mean? So I want to, screw him, I'm gonna charge him
Sometimes
extra.
people hold them hostage and,
What?
yeah, somebody will hold somebody
Yeah,
hostage.
only hostage
They say,
until
I
they
won't sign
build
the
the
waiver
fence.
'cause, yeah.
I won't sign the waiver, I want the fence, and the fence costs $20,000, if you give me 15, I'll sign the waiver. I'm sure there's some of
The
that,
subdivider's gonna put fence in.
yeah.
Yes,
That's his responsibility.
That's
okay, that's fine.
Okay.
We can do that.
But I mean, if it's just a minimal change, why make any change? That way, when somebody looks at it, and we publish this.
Well,
that
and I guess
fence
the only,
ordinance,
is
it's
a
not a
pain in the
change.
ass so that they can
If it's-
jump,
if it's-
the
if it's
standard is
truly a
another
hot
fence, but
topic.
maybe you don't want that.
It was
Sounds
a
like-
hard fence to get built.
I'm gonna tell you, we
That's what I
sat
was
in here,
told.
we sat in here longer talking about the fence thing
Yeah.
than what we started out early this morning with our meeting,
Yeah.
several times with.
I think you're there.
People in
I think
here.
you're where you need to be.
I think we're good.
What about the future maintenance thing? Is that something we were
No.
against?
Take it out.
Yeah.
I just don't want language.
I mean-
If Trent thinks it's counter to the code, I don't think we should have it in there. I'm guessing that was a Dale Oaks thing, and I remember what Jared's talking about. I just don't know if it's legal as we sit here and think about
Well,
it.
no, I've seen that in multiple other county ordinances where they reference the future maintenance.
I don't know.
If you take the county trustees out there, they're gonna say, you know, you got cattle leaning against this fence, or you got hogs doing something to this fence, this should be yours. Maybe they're gonna look at the other guys. You said you got kids bouncing four-wheelers off this fence, or you backed into it twice. You know, they'll have to work that out themselves. There's no sense inserting the county into any sort of a private dispute if we don't have to, and we don't have to.
If that fence is built, you know, when the subdivider builds it, to keep these cattle and that out, sheep and that, and then this guy does decide he wants to start pasturing that out, he's gonna make sure he's got his own fence, and more and less than anything, it's gonna be cattle. He's gonna go put that double strand of barbed wire up and run electric on
Do they, off the subject, do they raise hogs in the field much anymore, or are they pretty much all confined?
Not a
There's
whole lot.
some, most of them are confinement. There's a little sector of the industry where they're kind of free range, a lot like chickens, where it's, you know, natural,
Oh, there's that
this
place
and
up
that,
in
but.
Columbus Junction.
But that's not a huge part of the industry. That's probably something you'd find in a special aisle in Hy-Vee or something like that. The rest of them are all 2,500 head units.
And anymore, they're almost all pre-owned, like they're from conception to slaughter, they're all already
Can be.
contracted out.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, there's not many farmers, most farmers around here that put up hog buildings are either have a deal with Eicherman or whatever, whatever it is, or
Eichelberg.
Tri-Oak,
Yeah.
Eichelberg, or there's Mauschman or some, there's 3 big ones around here. Tri-Oak is there's 2 other bigger ones, but Tri-Oak's a big one locally. But you get up around Washington, you get into Eichelberg or whatever that is, and yeah, they basically, most farmers might get a small cut, but they're after the manure.
They're after the fertilizer.
Yeah, they're after that.
They
So,
make money on.
and then somebody else
fertilizer.
manages the building.
That's why Gabrieline's got so many up.
Absolutely.
So, are we changing it, so the only change, as I'm guessing, is instead of calling out that particular, it's something that constitutes a tight fence?
Yeah.
There's something in there.
So some of these like tweaks and just like to tight fence, I mean, these are references in state codes. I think it's just a little clear with state law stuff
that's,
too.
I
agree with
I like
that.
that other's.
And same thing, lawful fence, that's a state
Yeah.
code definition, and then they
So
define what is
that-
considered lawful.
If they need it, that gives the farmer what he needs, and it also takes a little of the burden off the subdivider.
Okay. Do we have anything else?
Oh, just a little consideration for parent parcels thing at the end, just to try to make sure, because we've had a number of instances where everything is above board for the subdivision lots themselves, but what happens with the piece that's left over, if it's landlocked or
Which goes back to the tape
Yeah,
rate
yeah,
one?
yeah. So we added some language in there, with so if there will be a piece of the parent parcel left over, which was being subdivided, if it's landlocked, an access easement shall be provided on the final plat, and then under no circumstances shall land of less than 66 feet along the boundary of a parent parcel be excluded, because we've had instances where they've literally tried to get around the fence right waiver by just not platting the lot up to the line, so there's a little strip in there that separates them, and so we want to make sure that that's explicitly prohibited.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, so it'd be like, they'd leave a little strip like this.
Oh, I can envision it.
Yeah.
It's,
They'd
I don't know if
they'd
it
like
was
leave a little
subdivision,
strip along there, so then they don't have to do the fence requirement.
Yeah.
which are just making a mess for themselves later when they do something like that.
Yeah, we just don't wanna encourage that.
Nope, I don't have a problem.
Otherwise, I don't know, do we want anything else from our
Yep.
subdivision?
The only
zoning
thing was
commission?
that section on the cluster subdivision at the end, which again was written before we had a zoning ordinance, and so we clarified it so that with references to the zoning ordinance, that where if it's in that jurisdiction of the 2 mile, there's a specific procedure it will follow that's through the zoning ordinance, but if it's outside that area, a similar type of development can be done through the subdivision ordinance as under that title of a cluster subdivision.
And I think I can hit that with general language, when we were talking about that, essentially saying, if another ordinance applies, which is more restrictive than, if another ordinance applies, which is more restrictive than the current consideration, or then the more restrictive consideration shall be applied. Yeah. And that's
Instead
simple.
of referencing the specific ordinance or something.
Yeah, instead of specific, a different ordinance or a specific instance, just say, hey, this is, if another subdivision or another part of our county or another part of, say, the state code is more restrictive, then that more restrictive ordinance is the one that's gonna take effect.
And actually, we'll get to that if we talk, whenever we get to the airport zoning thing, there's actually a section in there that basically says if there's a more restrictive ordinance than that, it's the more restrictive
But
ordinance.
in this case, it's essentially, since the PUD only exists as a category within the zoning ordinance, and there's zoning related considerations like density, setback, that's only gonna apply to those cluster subdivisions if they're located within 2 miles, whereas there should still be a way of addressing, it's probably gonna be extremely rare. There hasn't been one previously, but just in case there's somebody that wants to develop something like that, say there's like they create a lake in a wooded area and they want smaller lots clustered around it, that there's a way of addressing that if it comes up in the future. So that's just, so that instead of just having it all, one term describing all of those in the subdivision ordinance and a different one describing it in the zoning ordinance, it just separates those out and makes it clear that for the ones in the 2 mile, there's other considerations in the zoning ordinance beyond what's here. So.
Alright.
Thank you, gentlemen, yes.
Anything else that you guys noticed?
We got the
or had
land
questions
thing
about?
taken care of.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we'll double check the width on that. We had 50 feet, but we'll
Yeah.
let you know about that when we bring it back.
Right.
But otherwise, yeah, I think I got a couple other notes here, but we're good. And then we'll kind of discuss if it needs to go back to zoning commission or if it's just, here's, we'll look into that a little bit.
Oh, what you put here.
Because right now, I don't think we have any big changes on here.
Apart from the agriculture, the prime ag land and the width of
Prime ag land,
the width of
and
the
then
easement
a few
and
changes
flag
on
lot.
the fence
I
thing.
didn't think anybody was gonna come forward.
And
I don't
And
think
the county,
it was
and the county roads thing, they can apply to make the
Oh,
county
yeah.
roads.
See ya. Very sure, Jerry,
Are you
very
sure
sure.
are you sure we don't wanna put wording in there that if you have a subdivision along a public roadway that.
You could
just
appeal
take
to
over
county
the public
engineer.
roadway?
They don't ever wanna take over.
I know, that's what, make it mandatory if you're gonna subdivide, you gotta take over the roads.
Now, can we just briefly talk about the future? I'm assuming with the cluster of holidays and stuff, we're not doing anything on anything else until January, between budget and everything. I'm looking at my work/personal schedule, and I'm asking because I know there's an
We don't have a
airport
meeting
one.
on the 28th.
Yeah,
I'm
so
not
that
gonna
I
be-
know too.
I'm not gonna be here next week.
So I'm just asking because the other one's 80 pages, right?
Right.
And I'm just trying to figure out when I'm gonna read it, and I don't wanna have to do it if I don't have to yet.
On Christmas Day.
So I'm just curious, are we gonna
Merry
push it back till January? Cause I don't know when else, you're gone, Shane may not be here. And he
He'll be
may
on
call
Zoom.
in, but he may not be here physically.
Be on Zoom.
Yeah, whenever we can do it, I mean, that's,
We may have a subdivision next week if it goes through Burlington on Monday.
We're having a
Make
meeting,
sure they got a fence organ.
they're having a meeting, it's just physically, we may only have Jim here.
Okay, so if there's enough for a quorum for a subdivision, that's good, but if we wanna wait on
That's right.
if we wanna wait on the work session, that's,
That's
the
about
next-
the big
I wasn't
project.
sure, but now I'm sure.
I'm talking work session.
yeah,
They're
yeah.
having a meeting.
Yep.
So the
I
next
just know
work
that Shane may
session will
not
be on
be
the
here,
zoning ordinance.
and Tom may be on Zoom or
Yeah.
something, because he's gonna be gone.
Well, we still have to address the zoning ordinance and the airport,
So the next work session, the first one in oh no, we won't be able to do it on January the 4th.
We got budgets,
That's when
we got
budgets
budget
We
hearings.
got budgets and
yeah.
and union negotiations.
I think you're looking at late January or
It'll be-
February
it'll
to
be
get back to
tricky.
the strong.
You got time to read it, Brian?
Okay, unless you're gonna try to find another day of the week, I just wanted to make sure I didn't need to read this by next
Well,
Tuesday.
just, I'll tell you what,
Budget
just
hearings
hang it in the
and-
bathroom someplace and you
Yes.
can.
It's almost
Can do
impossible
whatever
to
you're-
schedule union negotiations, cause you gotta,
think-
besides the board, then you gotta come up with an
But
attorney
that
and a union
thing's tied up
rep
in all this.
that all have the same day.
Yep,
And that's, and they,
I mean, I think we
these,
should make
none of
sure
these are the only
they're all-
contracts they're negotiating.
I'm just wondering if we
So
wanna,
it's a-
if we wanna
it's a
just
new-
have them, have it
I mean, I know this is a
resolved,
priority,
it's
but right
done.
now there's some stuff
Maybe
about
they
it.
need to do something with the workaround like that, if it.
thank you, you keep
Yeah.
We're adjourned.
hollering,
I gotta leave at 1.
We're adjourned.
not working.
Or, if they're coming